All righty. We have got... Stephen looks very different today. Stephen lost all of his hair in one spot on his body and then replaced it with a bunch of hair in another spot in his body. Great Pete Quinones is joining me today, as you guys can see if you're watching the video version. If you're here live, thank you for joining us. I think that there is probably nobody watching live right now. So, so that thing was completely meaningless to say.
Hey, you're up over 1,000. You can monetize now.
Yes, I can. Yeah, that's right. So if anyone wants to send a super chat, you can do that. I forgot to say something about it last time, and I still think it's I think that there's a funny thing here where it's kind of like I'm fundraising for YouTube, and it kind of seems like everything that I do keeps coming back to fundraising for YouTube. So I'm just kind of embracing that role. What's up, Michael Corbell in the chat? Populibs, Giovanni.
Mike and I have talked many times.
Yeah, Mike is a good dude. He and I had a really good conversation just recently, and it's very interesting. Me coming from I grew up Seventh-day Adventist, and then I've been influenced a lot more throughout my teen years into my 20s by Reformed thinkers. And now I'm going down the Orthodox rabbit hole. And then Mike is a Mormon. So it's interesting coming from those different perspectives and evaluating these ideas, I guess, in this general school of politics and religion and philosophy and all that kind of stuff. And kind of seeing how all these different perspectives and schools of thought overlap and where they merge, where sometimes they both come from the same source, and you realize that these two things that seem like they're opposites are actually not. They're actually more the same than they are different. One of those I was kind of hinting what we're going to talk about today. That's kind of my thoughts recently on communism and capitalism have been I'm becoming less inclined to see either one really as all that legitimate. I also say that, but then it's a false dichotomy, really. And these are communism and capitalism are two wings of the same bird. And when you're trying to, I was talking just before we went live, I was talking about like you have like an analytical tool, and you take that tool and you apply it to a situation and you see what sort of feedback you get. And then sometimes you can evaluate the feedback, like what the feedback tells you, or you can evaluate like the feedback itself. And if I get something where when you connect someone, I almost said a name I probably shouldn't, given I don't know if you want to make certain things public. So there's various people who... What's that?
Probably not.
Okay, yeah. So there's various people who kind of break the calculus of like the left versus right. One example is someone I really recommend, if you're on Twitter, go follow this guy at Apex_SimMaps. He is he'll break your political compass, because I think he describes himself as something like a communist monarchist. And if you're using a particular political model, that's going to seem completely incoherent to you. But these people exist, and they're clearly not idiots. They're clearly not deranged or deluded. In fact, the people that tend to break that model, so they seem like the most important people. Like, this is someone who's such an original thinker. I need to understand. I need to understand their perspective, where they're coming from. So that tells me that the model that I'm using that can't account for these people that are like, maybe they're the edge cases, but they're like the most important ones. I need a model that will help me deal with to understand the most important ones, where they're coming from. So that's got me. I just finished the Ben Armani's Bitcoin Mystery School, and it's got me just my head is just spinning. And sometimes when I come on this show, I have a lot on my mind and I have a lot to say. And then sometimes I don't have very much on my mind, but I have a lot to say. And then there's sometimes where I have a ton on my mind, but I don't know if I have a lot to say, because I don't know how to put all these thoughts in the right order and have them make sense. But I'm really just I'm questioning a lot of the fundamental points of doctrine, I guess you would say, of my worldview, how I've understood the world from a libertarian, from an anarchist perspective, rooted in things like property rights and and ownership and self, the nature of the self and rationality. All these things are all that have seemed so coherent and so obviously self-evidently true in the past. Now that model is encountering these edge cases, and I don't know how to handle these edge cases with that model. So I'm to the point where I'm just ready to throw away the model altogether and kind of reinvent everything. And I think, Pete, you kind of it seems like you're going through, or you've been going through, sort of a similar revamping process philosophically.
Definitely approach. Something that you said when you were talking, when you and Jason did that show, talking about the LPMC, you said that you talked about Vashti.
Yep.
And how she had a boyfriend from Germany who was like, well, my health care is taken care of and my education is taken care of. That's real liberty. Well, if you're an ideological libertarian, the first thing you think is, no, that's communism, or no, that's socialism. But the problem is that that's because you have it in your head what is liberty, and you're a libertarian dictator. You want to dictate to everyone else what liberty is. And, Michael Bolden was from the 10th Amendment Center, was the first person I ever heard use that term. And he said, we can't tell people what to do. We can't. And it goes right to what you said, is that liberty to one person is liberty to, is slavery to another person. And slavery to one person is liberty to another person. It's all just a matter of perspective. And it's all, you want to get Misesian? It's subjective.
Yes.
So what, how do you talk to people? What is your conversation like? And it really starts getting more towards the whole thing that Jason talks about getting the hell out of the system, basically, to make yourself independent and make yourself free first. And then once you're free, then, you see if somebody else wants to come along for the ride with you. But to just assume that what you want, I see this on Twitter all the time. I saw the other day, it said, once the majority of people taste freedom, they're going to want it. And and my response was, where have you been the last 18 months?
Yeah.
What world are you living in? And what an arrogant fucking thought.
Yes.
God, it's like, really, it almost seems like they hate people.
Yeah.
And I hate most people, it's like, my
King of the misanthropes.
my fiance the other day was like, God, you just seem like you hate every minority that there is out there. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I hate everyone. It's just, there aren't really that many good slurs for white people. So it's like, there are a lot of good ones. Mayo, monkey, chalk, roach. We've finally gotten some good ones and everything.
Oh my God.
but it's like, I fucking hate everyone. It's like 95, I would say probably 99% of the population I don't even want to know. I don't want to talk to. I don't want to interact with. And so that leaves me with less than 1% of the population who may see life like I do. Okay, so if that's me, and Andrew just said white women must be stopped. So if that's me, and I can see, it's like, how the heck am I going to, what kind of situation, what kind of covenant community am I? And that's my only hope, is a Hapa covenant community with like 15 or 20 people, to feel like I'm absolutely what I would consider to be freedom, liberty. And you're going to give up some liberty in the process, because you're going to sign a contract saying you can't do this, can't do that, can't do this, can't do that. So who the hell am I to start talking about what other people? You have to chase your own whatever. And Andrew and I have been talking about, we recorded yesterday. We started talking about the anti-tax, and we started talking about a real local political solution for people who want to take that route, because there are people who are going to take that route. Okay, if they are going to, I want them to do the most efficient route possible, because I think what Andrew was talking about leaves it open for people like me who believe one thing, another person who believes another thing, another person who believes another thing. I don't know if a leftist will be in it, but I mean, they should be eradicated from the face of the earth anyway. So, I mean, I have no problems there. So,
Word. That was slick. That was slick. The really where this has taken me is thinking, like, kind of really trying to conceptualize that ideal community. But as I'm conceptualizing it, I'm thinking ideal community that's realistic. What are the properties of that? How do you build a community like that 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 can how do you build a community like that that can sustain the rest of the world not wanting your community to exist? How do you create a community like that? How do you, because, like, just purely on the basis of force, you're not going to win that battle. They're the enemy has far more foot soldiers than you ever will. So how do you then build a society, a community that respects the values that you share, that you have, that also can sustain itself from perpetual onslaughts from the outside, from people who don't want your community to exist? There that ultimately what you're looking for is, you're looking for a community that other you, that other people are incentivized to keep your community going. Other people are incentivized to allow you to exist, to allow your community to persist, and to to transact with them. And, like, you're not going to exist. You're not going to be able to exist as an entirely isolated, completely disconnected, off the grid society, unless you're willing to drastically reduce your standard of living, which nobody is. There's nobody. The You can assume when you're talking to people in this sort of context that maybe occasionally there's one person in the audience who is like, no, like, Stone Age, get us right back. Get it. I want to live out in the woods, no electricity, no cars, living off the land. There's very, very few people there's people who will talk a big game like that, but there's very few people who are actually willing to do that. So if you want to sustain a standard of living, you have to come to grips with the fact that you need to cooperate with the people who are around you, who despise you and despise your values. You have to come up with a way to cooperate, because if you don't, then continuing the direction that we're going right now will result in the extinction of libertarian values altogether.
Yeah, or anything right wing.
Right.
Hierarchy, family, everything. Right. And I shared that video. You saw that the guy who's in Pennsylvania, who's running for, it turns out, it said he was running for governor. It turns out he's running for a local seat, which is good. I'd rather have him run for a local seat. And there were people, like, one person commented, and this is how I deal with these people now. One person commented what he's doing. Like, one person tagged the FBI. Another person's like, well, he's calling for an insurrection. And I immediately commented to that person, and I said, well, teachers and administrators aren't people.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some good teachers out there. There are some good teachers out there. I mean, we know that they're there, but for the most part, they're just indoctrinaires. And they're just there to indoctrinate kids into a progressive religion, to a religion of the state, to a religion of chaos. I want this guy to walk into a meeting like that and have the power to take it over, and if the people won't leave, cast them out and just take it over by force if necessary. I mean, these people, what do you? They're no different to me than than common criminals on the street who'll just rob you. Just come up behind you, knock you over the head, and rob you. I mean, these people are scum, and they need to be eradicated. I'm sorry. What eradicated looks like, I don't know.
They're free to do whatever they want. They can just stop doing that.
They need to be removed. And I had put up suggestions. People said, "What when we win, and we will win, what do we do with the left?" And a great picture. Someone shared a picture. I wish I could remember her name, but she shared a picture of South Korea all lit up and North Korea all dark. And I'm like, I'll take that. That I like. That I like. That's a good idea right there.
That's fantastic. Yeah, yeah. There we go. There's the here's the model.
Yeah, yeah. Reconstruct. I mean, basically, due to them, what was done to the South during what they did to the South during Reconstruction.
Mm.
I mean, the South still hasn't recovered from Reconstruction. People don't realize that. They still haven't. The stigma's there. They need to be stigmatized.
Jim Goad makes the fantastic point that just saying Jim Goad will probably get this video deleted.
Yeah,
But but he makes the fantastic point that shortly, like through the process of Reconstruction and shortly thereafter, all of the stigmas that were associated with poor blacks were all completely whole cloth
Mhm.
picked up and transplanted directly onto poor whites. And it's the exact same group of people who are perpetuating those stereotypes. The like uneducated, talks funny, no culture, dirty, uncivilized, subhuman. It's all the exact same rhetoric, and it's all the exact same people. They didn't the people didn't change. They just changed the focus of their ire, I guess. And so ultimately the whole this tendency of regime libs to identify the South as a bunch of backwards hillbillies, it's fundamentally the same impulse by the people occupying the same social role as the spirit that opposed slavery. And this is a red pill that a lot of people don't want to hear. But it wasn't that the South was racist and the North wasn't. It's that they all were. And they were all fighting over how their racism was going to be exercised. And it just so happened that it was very convenient for power, for the institutions of power at the time, to transition all of that spirit, all that sentiment, and focus it onto an intra race war between upper class whites and lower class whites. And that's what we're in today. That's what this whole race war, it doesn't have anything to do with actual minorities. It's entirely white leftists, upper class white leftists who have contempt for the archetype or the stereotype of the lower class white leftists, because they see them as like, this is like the embarrassing younger brother who like taints me because I'm the rich lawyer and my brother is the homeless druggie and he's an embarrassment to the family. It's that sentiment is like it exists in their mind. You're not gonna just explain that away. You're not gonna just rationalize people onto your side.
Yep, it persists through today. And you were talking about these movements and how it's mostly run by white people. And when you do see a black person in there, what are they? They have postgraduate degrees. They come from rich families. Right. I mean, look at Stacey Abrams. I mean, Stacey Abrams like came on the scene, like she's like spoke at the like she was a speaker at the riots in the Rodney King riots in 1992. That's how she like came up and everything. And they painted her when she ran for governor in Georgia. I was living there, and they painted her as the son of the daughter of sharecroppers kind of thing. Both of her parents are academics. Her sister is an Obama appointed judge. I mean, she went through all of the the Telluride program, all of those elite programs and everything. And so yes, it's white people running this, but when you see the black face that they present, the Patrice colors, look at her background. I mean, she's a professor. She just bought her third or fourth house. Because this has nothing to do with social justice or equality. This is a grift. And when it comes right down to it, it's a grift for power and money. And they get both of them. I think don't quote me, but I am almost positive that BLM took in $10 billion in donations last year.
That's
$10
insane.
billion. I mean, what?
It's the
Like,
largest fundraising mechanism the Democrat Party has ever conceived, that any political party has ever conceived of.
it's insane. I mean, I remember all through last year, I was just like looking for the threads because libertarians were like, "Oh, we need to support these people in the street," and I'm like, there's no we here. There's no
Yeah.
we here. These are communists, and not the good kind of communists. There are some communists that I can actually have conversations with,
Mhm.
and they, it was like we were talking about before we started recording, how Hoppe says, 90 to 95% he agrees with Marx, and so you can have that conversation with somebody who's 90 to 95%. These people, I mean, a lot of them were drug addicts. A lot of them are mentally insane people. Yeah, I'm going to go march with them. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm going to be like the Libertarian Party candidates from last year and just go march with the people who are burning down cities. Or if they're not burning down cities, they're not decrying it. They're not denouncing it.
Right.
They're right there with it. And yeah, I mean, I put out a tweet today that said, elections don't matter. Um, election Politics is just a smokescreen for action, for what's going on. It's like when you're watching, like, so I shared that 10-second video of Joe Biden go at a Q&A, and he goes, do you have any questions for me? And you hear Nancy Pelosi on a hot mic go, no, we're not asking him any questions.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so you're going to blame everything that's going on in the world on Joe Biden. He doesn't even know his name. He shits his pants. Give me a fucking break. I mean, how clueless are you? It's like, and these are people who run around. There are people who say this, who run around. Oh, I'm red pilled and everything. Okay, sure. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, this is, and ever since I started listening to Jason again, I think you guys do great shows, and really that show when he trans went over, and Jason and I talked about this, so he's not going to take it as a slur. Is it just sounded so Tony Robbins-ish in the beginning and everything. It was a turnoff to me, but then watching the progression to where he's come and to see what he's talking about. I mean, really, the idea that rich people of means cannot sidestep all of these mandates is absolutely insane. No Pfizer employee is getting mandated to get a shot. No Moderna employee is getting mandated. Nobody who works in the White House is getting mandated to get a shot. That's all you need to know about power and influence and wealth. I mean, and so just keep spreading liberty.
That's actually, you segued into very well into what I wanted to talk about, related to what we're doing with the Nomad Network, kind of our ideas with that, and then some of the thoughts I've had as I've been learning, getting a better understanding of Bitcoin. So we'll get to that in just a second here. We've got to pay some bills and got to thank the people that pay our bills. So we are super chat eligible. Shout out Top Lobster in the chat. What's up, buddy? We hit 1,000 last week, and you guys can now send us super chats. We appreciate you guys spending your money on us as we spend our voice on your ears. Malin Keisner says, teachers are to education as McDonald's is to food, as cops are to security, as doctors are to healers. Our industrial society has flourished, it seems. Yes, that's a really good analogy. Teachers are to education as McDonald's is to food. The whole industry, the whole teaching industry is just is obsolete. Really, there's no. It's a short-lived little burst where this model of teacher has existed. It's very relatively short, and it's going to go away because it's part of the Prussian system, which is a part of the process of the elaboration of the Industrial Revolution and the desire to train little armies, to whether it's training little armies to go out in the battlefield or training little armies to go into the industrial corporations and factories. Either way, that's the purpose of that form of education, and it's it has an extinguishing effect on the society, because it's you're destroying the cognitive faculties of the people. So it's only going to last for X number of generations, and then just by process of natural selection, the people who have been most subject to it are going to be selected out of the pool. And the people who are going to survive are going to be the people who recognize this, and either the people who are just smart enough to survive in spite of it, and transcend and work the system to their own advantage because they were just that, high IQ or whatever, or the people who recognize the corruption of the system and began generations back the process of homeschooling and unschooling, and, or at the very least, if you're going to have a teaching model like this, having it be someone that who shares your values, and they're just serving as a proxy to you. That's the model that's going to persist, because that's the model that naturally contributes to human flourishing. So it's the one that's going to survive. That also means that it's going to be a target. So that means that if you value that, if you want that sort of system to persist and to flourish and to thrive, you have to proactively protect it. And this is what Pete's talking about with this guy in Pennsylvania, who's like, if these people who are teaching our children, who we have engaged in a contractual agreement with them that they're going to teach our children in return for us funding and supporting them, if they're betraying that obligation, we're going to step in and end that relationship. And if you don't like us doing that, tough. This is what's going to happen, because we're protecting our children. That's the kind of mentality. I don't care if you see yourself as left wing or right wing or what. That's the mentality that will sustain your culture and will protect your values and ensure that your values aren't just rhetoric that you share with other people who are like-minded for a short period of time in history, before all the libertarian communities are just extinguished and the values of liberty that libertarians talk about are extinguished with them. You have to protect your own communities proactively.
And the great thing about those values is that pretty much anyone can have them. It doesn't.
Yeah.
You don't have to. There's no race, creed, color, anything. And that's. I've told this story over and over again. People probably don't believe me. In Atlanta, my closest friend was a 6'6" black dude, Nation Islam.
That's amazing.
And we hung out, and I showed him Malcolm X videos he had never seen before.
That's fantastic.
And why? Because I had more in common with him than pretty much anyone around us, and everything. He understood the lies of everything. He understood how important culture, family, everything is. So why am I going? Well, it's like when I have Hotep Jesus on. I've had Hotep Jesus on 2 or 3 times, and we actually talked about like arranged marriages once, and people were just like freaking out. They're just like, what the hell is going on? It's like, what is he? Why are they having this conversation? And it's like, well, should we talk about the nap? Should we talk about how in Ancapistan national defense will be handled? I mean, it's boring. It's boring. I'd much rather, I just had I just released an episode today with a writer, an independent guy, lives in Israel, and wrote a scoria. I mean, just tore the New York Times apart. Goes over 10 instances where they just had an agenda, pushed it, and millions of people died. They were complicit. I mean, I had a tweet today. The New York Times is complicit in the deaths of more people than Hitler and Stalin combined. And I mean, I forget who was it who said, I'll paraphrase it. It's like, if you had to have a government, would you rather be governed by like the first 535 names in the local phone book, or like the New York Times editorial board? I'll take my chances with I'll take my chances with the 535 random names that end in A. I mean, but running candidates is going to change everything.
Right. That's funny. I tweeted this morning. I said, in quotes, Libertarians need to take over the LP to spread the message of liberty and roll back the power of the state, close quote, equals all the first graders need to take over the sandbox to proclaim to everyone their favorite color and roll back the power of the school board. It's just you're doing stuff that you're claiming is going to have an outcome. But if you actually look at the outcome of what you're doing, if you actually study the nature of the system, free from, or not, I wouldn't say it's free from an ideology, but it's ideologically indifferent, perhaps. If you just study the system as it's comprised, as it exists, natural cause and effect, what you're doing is not going to take over the LP to spread the message of liberty, roll back the power of the state. All three of those things, take over the LP, spread the message of liberty, roll back the power of the state. All three of those things are useless pursuits. Like, all three of them are, the only one that actually means something is take over the LP. That one actually tangibly means something related to an actual phenomenon. The other
Right.
two
It's something
don't.
that can, yeah, it's something that can be done.
Can be measured.
It's something that can be measured. The other two things are just abstracts.
Yeah. And with that, then anything can be plugged into them. You can plunk anything in there.
You can, basically what the LP could do is that they could take over like one town, replace everyone in like the council with libertarians, privatize, do like a HOPA, privatize the schools, pretty much privatize everything, and you have that one town, and that's technically spreading liberty. You can call that, okay, we spread liberty. Okay. But how many people in that town actually wanted that?
Right.
How many people are happy now? How many people are leaving? I mean, is the butcher leaving? Is the surgeon leaving? Who's leaving and who's coming in? I mean, you may get some people who flock to it. Who knows? But I think the assumption that people want the same kind of liberty that you want is just a fool's errand.
Yes.
I mean, and I want to. Al has something. Too. Yeah, Al has said something here, and I want to shout out my friends on Not a Podcast. Said Not a Podcast guys said teachers calling themselves educators is the same as a Subway employee unironically referring to themselves as a sandwich artist. It's exactly
That's brilliant.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
Perfect.
I mean, I was one of those people in high school who, like, just all of a sudden one day I was like, I'm smarter than all of these teachers. And I like checked out at that point. It was like I just checked out. It was like I just came to work and I stared at the clock. Just, yeah, that's what I see when, I mean, how do you fight that too? It's like the Republicans have been talking since, I think, 1979. I think the Department of Education was founded in 1979. Don't quote me. I know somebody will fact check me, because somebody already mentioned that the phone book quote is William F. Buckley when he ran for New York office. But I know that guy who wrote that. But what was I saying?
I don't remember.
Mustn't have been important.
I was following each of the rabbit trails you went down, and I lost the original track too.
Yeah,
you're talking about when you're
hang around Scott Horton too much.
You're talking about when you're creating a community of that values liberty, and are you like enforcing it on people?
Yeah. It's it's all going to come back to okay. So Department of Education, 1979. Yeah. And as soon as that was created, I mean, Reagan came into power very soon after. We have to get rid of this thing. They've been talking about getting rid of that thing for 41 years. They had a chance last year. They had a chance to pull all their kids out of school last year. They fought to get them back into school because it's a daycare program, and they don't care that that their kids are going to be turned into nice little progressives who 20 years from now are going to load them onto a boxcar for some random tweet that they said last week.
When you realize that, then you should recognize immediately that you have two choices. You could, on one hand, you could say, okay, well, in order to get the ideal society through this one method that I like, I have to first convert every single person in this society to share my values, so then we can all work together to create the new society that fits my values. You can go that route if you want. Or you could say, this is the way the people around me naturally are. So how can I use their already existing instincts? How can I use their already existing values and form myself around them to get what I want? You see, like one is like convert everybody, and then all of us together go to these values. So now you get stuck in this where you're basically having to say, well, my preferences are better than your preferences, so you should have my preferences, and here's all your reasons why. It's like super inefficient. It's incredibly costly. And if it was just that, that would be even that, like it doesn't make sense to do it that way. But it also happens that the process of trying to convert other people means that you're going to make enemies. And those enemies are not going to have the same qualms as you do about using different systems against you. So if your premise is we need to convert everybody intellectually to believe what we believe and value what we value, and then create the world that I want to live in, you're opening yourself up to like you're creating an immense amount of attack surface that will threaten whatever liberty you currently do have. So it's just completely backwards from a practical perspective. You're much better off taking people as they are, just accept them as they are right now, and say, with this existing body of people, with the existing body of values they have, how can I wield them to create the society that I want to live in? How can I use the system that exists right now to give myself the opportunity to choose which society I'm going to live in, rather than, well, I'm helplessly bound by the will of the majority, so I'm just going to go try to convince the majority to go along with me. It's yeah, exactly. Popular Liberty says it's the same mindset as Christians thinking they have to go unto all the earth baptizing people. That was actually when it clicked for me that this is Christianity at work. Because it's the exact same instinct manifesting itself in the exact same way, that our job is to evangelize the entire world and get the entire world all buying in doctrinally to a list of beliefs. That's like the fundamental premise of I don't know if this is like Western civilization. It's something that's baked deep into the mindset of everyone today who in Western culture, who are all effectively functionally Protestant Christians. Even most of the Catholics are functionally Protestant in their mentality, because they've bought into this narrative of the individual, this narrative of the atomized individual, that from whom everything flows. And that's just not how human beings arrange themselves. This is I want to get into community, but I need to read this ad real quick for Paloma Verde.
And Carlos is right here.
Is he in here?
Yeah.
There he is. Yeah, that's right. What's up, Carlos? All right, so we're gonna talk about your company. So PalomaVerdeCBD.com, you can get some really high quality CBD stuff. It's very, very good. I actually I ran out, and I haven't had the time to sit down and place another order, and I'm missing it. My sleep the last few nights has not been good. I haven't dreamed at all. It's like I've gone to sleep, and then I just kind of wake up after a little bit, and it's like, kind of, where am I? What am I doing? What's going on? I've been kind of tense and not feeling all that great. So I actually need to place another order, and I need to make the time to do that. But if you're going to order some, which I highly recommend you do, just use promo code KING. You get 25% off any order over $75. That's PalomaVerdeCBD.com. It's a libertarian small business, and one of the best things that you could support, because these are people who are actually living their values. They're providing value to the community, making themselves invaluable to the community, ingratiating themselves to people around them, and increasing their own wealth, power, and influence in the process. This is what it means to be king-pilled, is embodying this lifestyle. That's what I want to convey to people. That's the I guess the value or the message that I want people to take away. So we're very happy to support them, and we're glad that they support us. So that's PalomaVerdecBD.com, Promo code King, 25% off any order over $75. And yeah, okay,
Can I jump in?
go for it.
Because there was a question here from Peter, and he said, "What's the alternative to take over LP, spread message, etc.?" Okay, so the LPMC is not going away. So let me try to help them in my way. Okay, and they're not going to listen to me. I know that. It's fine. Okay, so there's two things going head to head right here. There's local politics and using a national platform to spread the message. Okay? All right. To restart the Ron Paul revolution. Okay. So now as far as local politics goes, I'm pro local politics, but I'm very specific about the way to do it. It has to be something that everybody likes. It can't be, you're gonna have to please a lot of people. Okay, it can't be, oh, this is the only way we're doing it. It's not going to be a libertarian dictatorship. Okay, so I need to see the LPMC's plan for what they want to do with local politics. Now, if they are emailing Andrew and asking him about his plan, I'd be all the more confident. But I doubt that they're doing that right now. They're probably in the Discord server ripping on him. And we may have seen some screenshots from that over the past 24 hours since Andrew and my episode dropped on Patreon and Subscribestar and Substack and everything. So, all right, local politics, okay? Then you're going to have a national spreading of liberty, reigniting of the Ron Paul revolution. Okay, if that message, when you're bringing people in, if they're not immediately told, okay, the way we're going to have any kind of significant changes at the local level, and here's how we're going to do it, and this is what you're going to do, and what you need to do in order to help us achieve these goals, it's going to fall apart like the Ron Paul revolutions of 2007 and 2012, where all these people got excited. I don't know that they know what they got excited for. I think they just went out there and they chanted a bunch of things. I don't think most of them did like I did, got all excited in 2007 and then started reading and started going down the rabbit hole and, basically educated myself on all this and then educated myself out of it. But if it's just going to be, it's almost like multi-level marketing, where it's like you go out there and talk to as many people as possible. For every 100 people you talk to, you're going to keep 3. For every 100 people that get excited about a new Ron Paul revolution, you're going to keep 3 maybe. And what are you going to, and let's say that that's fine. Let's say that that's all well and good. What are you teaching them to do? What do they know what the plan, because they're not being recruited to the Libertarian Party. They're basically being recruited to the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus, or if Dave Smith runs for president, they're really being recruited to Dave Smith.
Yes.
And what is the message? Forget the message. What is the plan? When these people come in, how do you keep them? How do you keep them excited? Because you're not going to win the presidency. So how do you keep them excited? Have you gotten them excited about local politics? Have you explained to them that if any kind of political change can be done, it's going to be at the local level? Because if not, at the end of all this, they're just going to have like a really nice election high, like a lot of the Trumpers, you saw that kind of thing. And then it just all tapers off and they go to the 4 wins. That's my problem with spreading liberty and taking over the LP. And I think, was it you or Jason who said it recently? It's like the LP is not there. It doesn't possess power. It's a vehicle for people to go to, but the power is all from the outside. the power is all money being brought, is the money that's being brought in. And then as soon as that money comes in, well, they own you. They own you. I mean, look at Cato. Look at the Cato Institute. I mean, most people don't know this. Donald Trump had Cato Institute people in his cabinet. I mean, we're on his team, writing bills that weren't getting passed. They weren't getting. But here's the thing: why isn't the Cato Institute like the Mises Institute? Because Koch money. Kochs are open borders libertarians. They're libertarians, basically. They produce. I mean, they're worse than libertarians. To me, libertarians are Rothbardians who think they're right wing, but they're
Yes.
they're Rothbardians who say there's no left nor right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's no left nor right. The Beltway libertarians. I mean, there were Beltway libertarians in Donald Trump's cabinet. What happened? Oh, well, the left prevented him from doing. Yes, the left prevented him from doing anything. Go read Unqualified Reservations and you'll find out why.
Yes. Read about the Iron Polygon, which was actually a candidate for today's episode. I almost read that. I almost did a live reading of that. So we're going to definitely do that here in the near future, because when you understand the nature of the Iron Polygon, when you understand the nature of the way these systems, the way that they exist to perpetuate a specific kind of ideology, and they don't, it's a completely decentralized mechanism. This is the thing. Like, this stuff all operates on a voluntary basis. These aren't people having a gun held to their head acting in a certain way. This is people living out their values. There isn't necessarily like deception or force inherent in a lot of this. That's the thing that libertarians just don't really want to accept. They have, like you said, they say, well, if people experience liberty, they would then they would want it. I'm convinced that the majority of so-called Rothbardian ANCAPs, if they experienced what actual liberty, the way they describe it, if they actually experienced that, they wouldn't want it. They wouldn't want to exist in that way, because ultimately, and this kind of takes us into the next angle of the conversation I wanted to go with, is that human beings are not individuals. They just don't function as individuals. They never act or think or behave as individuals. And if you have a model that treats human beings or assumes human beings are individuals and think and act as individuals, you're using a bad model. You're using a model that's going to give you bad results when you begin to make decisions according to that. Ultimately, human beings are they're an expression of their own culture, which is a derivation of, or not even a derivation, it's like an accumulation of all the tribes in a given area and the values of all of those tribes. I had a thought. So I just got confirmation that we're going to have another interesting guest here who's going to hop on at the top of the hour in about 18 minutes. So that's going to be very interesting. You should know who I'm talking about.
I'm sticking around. Yeah.
Yeah. This conversation is going to take an interesting turn.
Yeah. This is going to get fun.
Yeah. So what was I just saying? Individuals. So when you treat, this is going to be too much fun. I remember what I was going to say. The thought that I had this weekend was, so this concept of Dunbar's number of 150 people approximately. This is sort of supposed to be like the ideal size for a human society.
It's too much for me.
If you get beyond, if you get beyond 150 people, then the society begins to break down, which I think it's basically, if I remember right, I don't remember where I read this, but I'm pretty sure that what it is it's something having to do with the human mind's capacity for remembering individual human faces. And it's like beyond 150, then your mind can't keep track of that many individuals. And so it starts categorizing them. It starts stereotyping so you can't remember each individual one. So for that reason, trust begins to break down. And the thought that I had was, I wonder if there's a connection between the 150, the Dunbar's number of 150, and the fourth turning. Because if you assume a family has about 3 or 4 kids, each set of parents had 3 or 4 kids, it would take about 4 generations to surpass Dunbar's number. If you're thinking in terms of a tribe, when in like a time when humans were more tribal, and so I wonder if that's. I'm sure there's lots of things that affect those cycles, but eventually, if you're growing your community, if you're trying to maintain a community that's larger than about 150 people, you're going to have to start compromising on your values if you want to retain peace. Either that, or you have to be prepared to fight. And if you're going to start fighting, you need to make sure that this is just like a matter of just practical, like obvious, basic principles. If you're going to do something that leads to fighting, you need to be sure that fighting will be in your interests, not in the interests of your enemies. So if your strategy involves something like, eventually, if this doesn't work, we're going to have to fight.
Yeah, you lost.
You've already lost. Right. You have to prevent the fight from happening before it ever does, which means you need to be the one initiating the peace. You need to be the one seeking to coexist in some manner with the people who don't share your values, the people outside of your tribe. So you have to create a tribe that has a mechanism that holds the tribe together, but also has a mechanism that holds it in stasis with the tribes around it. There has to be some form of agreement for them to maintain that stasis. And this is when I've talked in the past about liberty being an engineering project. This is the sort of thing that, like, what I've been trying to drive at. That ultimately, for anything resembling peace, prosperity, and human thriving, which is ultimately the goal of the liberty. The goal of the liberty isn't liberty by itself. It's libertarians want liberty because it creates prosperity and peace and human thriving. So ultimately, the goal is that prosperity and peace and human thriving, and the liberty is seen as the means for getting to that.
Yeah. I saw, I don't know if you knew this, but Bob Murphy was interviewed by Jordan Peterson about 3 months ago, and it dropped today. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. And the good thing about it is both of them talk about human flourishing. And that's what and when you're talking about economics, that's what it comes back to, because Peterson was almost playing devil's advocate, bringing up all the communist rhetoric, property is theft, that kind of thing. And, but Bob brought up the classic one about, if I steal something from you, then it was your property. So it's a contradiction, it's a logical contradiction. But it's about human thriving. But here's the thing. Let's bring it back to the beginning. A lot of people don't want that. Mm-hmm. Or they don't know that they want it. So maybe you got to educate them. Maybe you need to get out there and, really, try to get that message out. But you're not going to force them. There are people who want to oppress other people. And there are people who, and if you want to do something about that, if you want to say, well, we can't allow that. Well, you're a neocon now. You're running, you're a Trotskyite. You're running all over the globe, putting down people who want to put, it's the whole thing of, it all comes back to, what's funny is libertarians can make the argument of, why are you going to war in a country in the Middle East that doesn't want our help, that will never want our help, that will never share our values? Why are you trying to democratize them?
I know where you're going.
Hey, libertarians. Why are you trying to make people into libertarians who don't want to be libertarians? Oh, because everyone's a libertarian. They just don't know it.
Source, please. And this is why Pete's Dunbar number is 3.
I like 15.
Yeah.
15. Yeah. I can scare up 15. I could scare up 15 people probably. And what's funny is some of my closest circle that I have now probably wouldn't be in there.
That's fantastic.
I don't know. I got to get to know you better.
Don't worry, I won't tell them.
But yeah, this is, and so many of these people are just so unserious. I mean, it's like, I know some people have already heard the conversation that Andrew and I had yesterday, and they're already commenting on it and criticizing it. And in the criticism, you can tell they don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're just criticizing the name GOP Mises. He had to steal the name Mises so that he could have some name recognition. These are very smart people. Very smart people. I mean,
that gets to an interesting point too. The idea that that publicity is like a good thing, or is advisable, or like this is what drives the notion that we need to have a revolution. We need to have the Ron Paul revolution. It's not just we need to be able to take over local governments and start making changes on the ground. It's we need to have a big, loud, productive national campaign that gets the attention of lots and lots of people. But if you recognize, as is plainly evident, that lots and lots of people not only don't want libertarian values, they're actively hostile to it. And they're people who are very closely aligned with the existing center of power. And they don't have any qualms trying to replicate, say, Australia in the United States, except targeted toward people who have libertarian values. So
yeah.
if your goal is to be effective on the local levels, and you've recognized that libertarian values are unpopular, you're actually working against yourself by having a loud national campaign, because now you are contaminating the word libertarian. Now, if you want to be effective on the local levels, you can't be a libertarian. You can't be attaching yourself to that brand, because then by default you're attaching yourself to the Eye of Sauron. You're putting yourself into the crosshairs, which is only going to compromise your ability to be effective at the local level. All of this all gets down. Someone said earlier in the chat that I can't remember how they said it, like something like spreading the message of liberty. That instinct that we need to spread the message of liberty to the whole world is a close cousin to we need to make the world safe for democracy. It's the same. It's coming from the same root ideology, which is liberalism. These are just wings of liberalism. Van Armani likes to talk about how he brings this up all the time. He mentions how Marx and Menger both went different directions from Ricardo. They both started from the same premise and just went in a different direction. But the fact that they came from that original premise, the fact that they shared like axioms, it is what has made them ultimately to be just a dialectic pair that's driving toward the same end goal. Because as when it gets back to it, it uses humanity as it's an artificial intelligence that embodies human beings and uses them as fuel to advance a technocracy. That's the ideology of liberalism. Liberalism is an artificial intelligence. It's a spirit that inhabits human beings, wears them as a suit to advance the goal of technocracy, using capitalism and communism as opposite ends of a dialectic that functions working toward the final synthesis.
Yeah.
And if you're borrowing from either one of them, you're going to wind up in the same location.
Capitalism is going to get hijacked no matter what. I mean, it's like government. It's like people are like, well, if we get to anarchism, one of the critiques of anarchism is, well, if you get to anarchism, you'll just have a government again. Yeah, no shit. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean,
that's what Populibs likes to say, that he uses Malice's saying that, but he tweaks it slightly, and he says that any descriptions of anarchy, both historical or present, are inevitably a description of the status quo. We are, in a sense, in Ancapistan already, and everybody has voluntarily, just the same as just as voluntarily as they would in an actual Ancapistan, has chosen the existing model. it's not going to be different if you actually reach functional, like technical utopian Ancapistan. All of the exact same forces, all the exact same spirits are still going to be at play, that are still going to have the same pressures driving toward the same end goal. So someone here, Libertarian Podcast Review, left super chat, $5, said, honest question, does ignoring politics actually equate to living in Ancapistan? Politics won't ignore you, therefore local greater than national. At no point do I advocate ignoring politics. Never have I said that you should not get involved in politics whatsoever. Nobody should be in it whatsoever. I'm saying
that's
that
like somebody, that's like some psychopath is running around your neighborhood with a loaded gun, and you're just like, oh, just ignore him.
Yeah, right. I'm saying get involved in politics intelligently, effectively, and have a clear, realizable outcome. And to do that, I think that people need to reimagine, they need to reimagine their own presuppositions and break themselves out of the liberal mold. If you're within the liberal mold and you're trying to achieve liberty goals within that liberal mindset, you're just feeding the system that's going to continue. It's just going to pull you right in and chew you up and spit you right back out as it continues building itself into the technocracy.
And understand, if you're going to get into politics, I mean, even libertarian politics is, I think it's insane that a libertarian can say, well, I mean, politics is all about money. And then they get involved with the Libertarian Party, which is a political party, and there's no money there. Or they don't have the money to actually move a party. Yeah, and so, like, if I had Coke money, the Cokes are libertarian-ish, okay? Why haven't they given any money to the Libertarian Party? Why do they give money to the Why do they give money to Republicans? Is it because they don't see that they're not real libertarians? No, because they know where the power lies. They know that they can get more done by going with a group that is going to seek power. I mean, the GOP is just awful. I mean, it's just terrible. I mean, they even when they have seemingly all the power, the White House, Congress, and the Supreme Court, the left is still in charge. It's just it's so amazing, you know. It's like the whole Trump thing. Oh well, Trump couldn't get anything done because yes, that's why Trump couldn't get anything done, because they're not it's not in charge. What does Yarvin say? The left gets power and immediately they seek to get more power, and all they care about is getting power. And the right gets power and they're like, well, I guess let's do a tax cut over here, and then we'll help these people out over here. Where if they just went pure friggin' power hungry, they could get all the power and they could just do those things at will. But they don't have it in them to do it. Yarvin also wrote that article after the election last year where he talked about how Trump could actually still be president and make himself dictator, and that it would be constitutional.
Right.
And that should tell you something. If somebody can actually make themselves dictator and it's constitutional, that's all you really need to know about government. That's all you really need to know about this government. I mean, it's like, oh, we're gonna spread liberty and we're gonna take over the government. Really? Really? Even if you did try to do that and try to get some national power, they'll just invoke that. Especially if there's a Democrat in office, they'll invoke that. Come on. I mean, where are we at right now? I mean, we're basically at a dictatorship, and a fascist one at that. I love the right wing. I was talking to someone, some conservative. We had a great conversation until we got to. I mean, he thought that Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are far left socialists, and I'm like, they're actually center right neoliberals, and he couldn't hear it. He couldn't hear it. It was Chinese, and he didn't understand Chinese. He couldn't hear it. Because people don't really understand. I mean, that's just saying that like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are like center right neoliberals, that's like just a little below the surface
Mm-hmm.
of what people see. When you can start getting down here, you start realizing all this up here doesn't even really exist.
Yeah.
And it's all the power that's being, and it's somebody in the side is injecting all their influence and all their money into what's happening down here. And people
It's
can't see it.
kayfabe.
Yeah. Oh
It's
yeah. Oh
kayfabe.
yeah.
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 It's the whole everything happening up along the upper fringes that you're talking about there is all a performance art. It is as much the state as as Hollywood, as your typical television programming. All of these are all assets of the state, of the regime itself. And I think libertarians don't realize, like, not only do they not realize how unpopular their ideas are, they don't realize how very, very few people there are. There's like, because we don't exist in the real world anymore. We exist in a eh, kind of this hybrid, but mostly digital world. That's where most of our consciousness at now exists. Even if you're out walking around existing in the real world, the majority of your consciousness is in the digital world. And there's a completely disproportionate uh, allotment of people involved in commentary compared to the actual distribution of people in the real world, just because
Mhm.
of the selection effects that lead to the types of people who are going to get involved in a conversation about politics. It's naturally going to go toward the extremes, and the most radical people are going to be the ones who are represented. And libertarians, by definition, libertarianism is radical in this culture. So libertarians are overrepresented on the internet relative to the rest of the world, to the population of the rest of the world. So it's not like you can just like, oh, there's just, we need to like take over the LP, and if we get enough fervor kind of whipped up, then the LP will actually become a vehicle of power. So the purpose of taking over the LP is taking it from not powerful to it becomes a vehicle of power. But to think that, to actually have those thoughts put themselves together in your head, you have to like have no understanding whatsoever about the actual influences of power, where power actually resides, and how it's exchanged, at what levels, at what depths it actually happens, where the political system has no effect on it whatsoever. You could fire all of Congress and replace them with completely brand new people. Just plop them all in there. Like you said, 535 random people from the phone book. Plop them in there, and the system would hardly change, because the actual influences of power are so deep. And those influences of power will have to buy into whatever sort of world you want to create if it's going to become a reality. So you have to give them an incentive to buy into your model. You have to show them how your model will not just serve your own interests, but it will serve their interests as well. Because the masses are going to do whatever they say. The masses are going to follow the actual heart of the regime's power. They're going to follow it wherever it goes, because that's the nature of the regime. So when the people, like you talk about these people that can't even conceptualize the idea of, for example, Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi being center right neoliberals, they don't see the actual scope of the political spectrum. They're just over here way on the very furthest left reaches of it within liberalism. So someone who's center right within liberalism is at the farthest left end of the actual political spectrum. But you won't see that whole political spectrum if you just assume the liberal premise of the world, the nature of the world, the individual, the sovereign individual, the ideas of liberty, all of these things. These are all ideas that are furthered by the actual powers of the regime. When they're locking people down in the name of freedom and liberty. They're saying we need to be free of this virus so we can go back to life as normal. They're saying when you go out, you threaten other people's liberty. If you go out and you're unvaccinated and you're not wearing a mask, they're using your rhetoric and your values against you. And if you don't understand that, if you don't recognize that, you don't fully comprehend the magnitude of the task ahead of you. That it's vastly more than try to take over a political party. We're talking about the a fundamental reorganization of society. Now, it just so happens that there is a fundamental reorganization of society coming. It's on the horizon. It's, in some senses, it's already here. Jason has been calling it the Great Transition. And what it's actually going to look like is hard to say. This is perfect timing. Boom, absolutely perfect timing. That was exactly what I was hoping for. I was trying to segue in, just hoping that this guest would pop in, and he popped in at the exact time. What is up, Cyprian, formerly known as Armani? For those of you who have been under a rock for a while.
Hey, Ben.
Hey, Pete. Good to see you, man.
That was fantastic. I think that there's this really funny contrast here where there's all this hair and then the rest is none at all.
Can I jump in with something real quick? Okay, so you've been talking about, you and Jason have been talking about individual liberty, and everybody's talking about the Ron Paul revolution. Okay, I've been very fortunate enough to spend a lot of time around the man. Okay, I've talked to him myself on many occasions, and I listen to people have conversations with him. What do you think the ratio of conversations where someone goes up to Ron Paul and goes, "You inspired me to take over my local legislature and we made it all libertarian," versus "You changed my life. You changed my thinking"? Ron Paul didn't start a revolution, a revolution of a group, which is what you would normally think a revolution is. Ron Paul started a revolution inside the individual. And that's the only way that you can do that. It's the only way that it's going to work. I mean, now saying that, I think that Andrew's ideas for local government are fucking amazing. They're the best things I've ever heard in my whole life, and I want to run with it. We'll let Texas and Florida run with it first. But what I've seen just by studying Ron Paul and looking at Ron Paul and being able to spend time with him is he changed people's individual lives. He didn't change anything, because the one man can't do it, and not 1,000 can't do it. Bringing 10 million people into the LP is not going to do it. It's not. And people really need to come to the conclusion that Jason talks about, of making yourself wealthy in the sense that you can become a nomad, you can work from anywhere, you can work digitally. I've gotten to that point myself and moved into a much smaller town with a much smaller population where people aren't falling for any of this, and it's pretty nice. And but that's really what it's all about. And I don't have millions in the bank like Vin. So
Vin doesn't have millions in the bank either. No, whoever's listening out there,
I'm messing with you.
Vin has nothing. Vin is dead broke. Vin is dead broke. Absolutely broke.
I don't think Vin has anything in the bank.
Zero.
But it's all about now basically having the freedom that if things got bad here, I can work from anywhere in the world now if I wanted to. So I think Jason's right there. I think Jason is really on the right track with that. And not a lot of people, maybe a lot of people won't be able to do it, but I think they are, because I think the world is changing enough that working remotely is going to be the new thing. I've already seen it. It's so many.
Is it even working remotely at this point, Pete? Do we even really still call it remotely? Because if you're just working online, everything we're doing is online, right? So if our entire social life is online, why wouldn't we expect our employment to be online too, right? Like in the same sphere, you would think.
Yeah. When you say remote, it's like remote from where?
Yeah.
And it presumes the original format.
I consider Vin to be remote. So
yeah,
this is pretty. But then again, it's like, but look, we're having this conversation, right? And so, in terms of the way that we're interacting with the world, it wouldn't matter whether I was next door to you or whether I was here. This is going to look the same. The user experience is going to look the same. So that's it. it really, I think what it goes to, Pete, is it's this idea of if people will change their minds from out of the great before, so many people want to go back to the great before. But the people who are going to survive and thrive, whether on the good side or the bad guy side, are going to be the people who have shifted their minds and say, okay, the great before is over. There's new rules. The world is a different place. We need to approach it with those new rules. And so, like you say, the people who figure out, the place that I need to be, that I need to have my employment set up, needs to be in this digital sphere. Because if I'm still working out of this, like, I need to go into an office and do all of that, that's going to be gone. Right. So it's just like any one of these, to where it was like, yeah, I used to sell my goods at the local market, but really what I need to be doing is I need to be selling it to a wholesaler who's doing distribution. And it's just like, if I keep doing this local market thing, I'm not going to be able to survive against the people who are doing it in a different way. So I think that's been the difficult thing for people. And so much of the fight coming from our side has been, let's go back to the great before. Let's figure out how we can stop this or reverse this or turn this around or end this. And it's like, no, you need to figure out how you can move through it. And I think that's so much when I hear like, what do you guys, it's Praxis now, it's not post-libertarian. Like whatever the thing is that we're all talking about, because we're all talking about the same thing. And the vein that runs through all of it is like, you can't fight this. Don't resist it. You have to move through it, like past it. And that's what you're talking about. That's what Jason's talking about in his own way. That's what I'm talking about. That's what Matt's talking about. That's what Popular Liberty is talking about. That's what everybody's talking about, is like, how do we not fight this? How do we accept that this is about to happen and move through it? And look, that's the only healthy way to approach this. Everybody else who's like, no, we just need to go back to the way that things worked in the great before, that's guaranteed to fail. Guaranteed.
It's leveraging the existing momentum and figuring out how to build yourself a long enough lever that you can influence that momentum to your own ends, to whatever your ends are. When we talk about with the show with Jason, when we talk about the name, when we say wealth, power, and influence, you talk about wealth. A lot of people will equate wealth to number of dollars, or like, to be wealthy, I have to be a millionaire or something like that. That's not what we mean by wealth. Wealth actually is it exists before the currency that you use. It exists before even that type of transaction takes place. Wealth is your value as a person that you can provide to other people. It's the accumulation of assets. It's the accumulation of skills. It's your talents. It's your connections, your network. That's what your wealth is. Your wealth is in both your net worth and your network, as the speaking of Tony Robbins. That's what wealth is. So if you're thinking of it just in terms of, I need to make lots and lots of money, you're still existing in the great before. You haven't gotten up to speed with where things are going. And this was where I wanted to. I just finished the Bitcoin Mystery School this weekend, and I feel like as I was thinking about what I was going to say about it, like, I don't want to say that I feel like I understand Bitcoin less, because that seems like that's not a very good endorsement of the program. And I think that
no, please don't say that
program. But what I realized is there's so much below the surface that I didn't even know was there. That now that I've learned more about it, there's so much more that I have to learn. And I'm realizing as well that I'm never going to actually understand this like you do, Vin. I'm never going to get to that point. I'm never going to have that technical savvy, that technical understanding of the actual mechanics of it. And in part because I don't know if I have the capacity for it, and in part because I don't have the desire to.
Right. Exactly.
I want to be connected to people who I know share my values, and I want to provide value to them in whatever way I can, to where they want me around so that I can take advantage of what they're bringing to the table. And this has been profoundly transformative in me understanding how human beings relate to other human beings around them. That if you're seeing yourself as an individual and your goal is that you have like a debit and credit chart in your mind of my liberty has been aggressed upon this much, therefore I need to free up this much of my this like materialist sense of thinking of yourself as this isolated individual whose job is to fight against all the forces of humanity to free yourself from it. Like, I guess it's maybe the embodiment of the hero archetype, but it's just it's fundamentally flawed. Human beings are not individuals. Human beings are members of a tribe. And the most fundamental unit of that tribe is the family. You can't reduce it any more than the family. Because when I'm born, I'm not born as an individual. I'm born as a son. And maybe a brother. And maybe a cousin, maybe an uncle. Maybe if something's really, really weird, I'm a grandpa. But I'm born into relationships. I'm born into a network of relationships, and those relationships form my identity. There's this paradox of identity where I say, this is the thing that identifies me, that makes me stand out from the rest. And what I use for that is, here's all the other things that are around me. Here are all the people that I'm connected to. So to identify myself as an individual, I have to appeal to the collective. This is another model that it's I'm realizing this is just a broken model. It's not useful. It doesn't provide a useful explanatory power to actually transition through life. And so these sorts of, I guess, times of crisis, on one hand, it seems like, oh, this is really, really bad. But for me, this crisis is bringing to light it's like switching lights on in the dark, showing me the actual territory in front of me. And now when I recognize the territory, I'm better able to navigate through it. But I've realized the extent to which I depend upon my community. I need a community. Every single one of us needs to have a tribe of people. And the actual size of that tribe depends on what you're trying to do. And what you're able to do is always going to be constrained by that. And that's where you get into the actual nature of technology. But the last thing I'll say before I wanted to get your thoughts on this then is, for those of you who've listened to the show for a while, you know that I talk about Lord of Spirits all the time. And one of the best things that I've taken away from that show so far was when they were talking about Passover. And they pointed out that when the angel of death came through and they're painting their doorposts, that was not something that, like, we tend to think of this as, you have the Egyptians who are like the people who have the black hair and wear the clothes, and then you have the Israelites who have the long kind of baggy shaggy hair, whatever. And like, we think of these things in really stark contrast to each other. And then all of the Egyptians, all of their firstborn died, and then it was all the Israelites who didn't, that were free, separate from it. But it wasn't. It was anybody who participated in the ritual. Anybody who did. And we know for a fact that there were people who were not ethnically Israelites. They didn't even have that categorization, this like ethnically Israelite. They didn't have that. The tribe was identified by how you behaved. The tribe was identified with the rituals that you participated in. And when you participated in that ritual, that's a public signal to everyone else that this is my identity. My identity is my praxis. It's not just the orthodoxy. You have to have the orthopraxy, which is what identifies. Because if someone comes up to me and they say, I believe XYZ, that doesn't necessarily tell me anything about them. The way that believe is used very often is like, I think. It's like, I think this list of thoughts. And that's how Western Christianity tends to approach how Western people tend to approach Christianity, period. That is this list of beliefs that you have to have, this list that you check off and you say, I believe this, I believe this, I believe this, I believe this. But doctrine is not religion. Religion is your practices. It's the behavior that you engage in that identifies you to your tribe, and that's what your tribe unites around. And what we're seeing today is, I was going to say it's a lack of praxis, but it's not. It's bad praxis. People are doing things, but they're doing things that are unproductive because they're working from a broken model. I realize that's I just threw a whole bunch of stuff at you, but what do you have? What are your thoughts on that, Vin?
So the first place that I would go with this that's directly relevant to the conversation that has been ongoing. I think you've really been carrying on the conversation in a great way. I think sort of just keeping the march going, because it's important. And it really goes to, I think, when you and I were first sort of drawn into this conversation, because I think we really were drawn into this conversation, and then we just we continued to sort of have it. There is this notion, and I've been talking about this, I tweeted about it recently, but I keep coming back to this with people, is that, people will say, when confronted with the idea of, hey, maybe that's not the right thing for you to be doing at this time. Maybe that's not the right way for you to be spending your time. And that may be everything from participating in a political party to going out in the street and protesting, any one of these things. And they say, well, at least X person is doing something that's better than doing nothing. And sort of this the idea with the Passover is doing something, anything, better than doing nothing? Because actually, when you stop and think about it for about 5 minutes, that flies in the face of all lived reality. So all your lived reality, think about anything. Think about there's something wrong with your car, right? Your car is making a funny noise. There's a tiny set of correct actions that will fix your car and make the situation better. And there is a literal infinite set of actions that, if you do them, will make the situation worse. An infinite set. Okay? So if you don't know for sure, or you haven't at least sat and thought about what the right action is, and you just say, well, do something, then it's like, no, you've virtually guaranteed that you're going to make it worse. You've virtually guaranteed. That is all of your lived experience. Your sink, this is the classic like sitcom dad, the sink is leaking and the wife says, hire a plumber. I know what I'm doing. And he makes it worse, right? He would have been better off doing nothing. That is our lived experience of the world. And so when we start talking about tribe as praxis, which is totally true, by the way, like we don't think in terms of tribe, but even nation, all of this, because you will hear somebody say something like, that's un-American, right? That behavior is un-American, which says that American as an identity requires a certain praxis. And that if you do this thing, it's un-American or heretical or whatever it is. This practice is heretical. It's rare that a belief would be heretical, but it's like preaching the belief, getting people to do something, right? And so this is the key, is that what you're looking for is the tribe of people, and who your tribe needs to be is the tribe of people doing the right thing over a long period of time. And how do we know who those people are? Well, they continue to exist. And that praxis continues to exist as a tradition. Something doesn't become a tradition and last thousands of years because it doesn't work. That's what you would call a fad or a fashion, things that would get replaced by something better. If something is a tradition, that means nothing has been able to supplant it. And look at how hard the wokes are trying to supplant tradition. And it's still, they just have to grind at it all the time, whereas the tradition just works. And what we're seeing is that at the same time as the wokes are doing their thing and the Church of Woke is expending all of this energy, that the traditional churches, in spite of themselves, are gaining membership. In spite of themselves. The Orthodox Church is growing. The Catholic Church, in terms of traditional Catholics, is growing. Even every traditional idea, people are just going towards it on their own. Because they see that the praxis, they're looking for something to stand on. That's very much what it was for me with Orthodoxy, was I was looking around and I was like, what can I stand on that when I do the practice, I can actually, like, just by myself, not with anybody else, no virtue signaling, go into your closet and pray to your God who is in secret, right? When I go and do it by myself, that nobody knows I did it, I get the positive results. That's what I can stand on. That doesn't exist in terms of the Church of Woke. The only way you get positive results in the Church of Woke is to virtue signal. You can't, what are you going to do? You're going to pick your pronouns in a vacuum in secret? Who's calling you by the pronouns? Right? That practice. You're going to wear your mask in secret? You're going to get your vaccine and there's nobody else around? Think about all of their practices require that everybody else watches you do it. But then painting the blood on the door. You're painting the blood on the door, and it doesn't matter if your neighbor sees it or not. What stops the angel of death is the practice of the blood on the door for you, even if you were the only one who did it. Right? That's the difference. That's the difference. And so when I look around, even in terms of the people who I guess I would say I was formerly allies with, and I see the things that they're doing, I say, is this giving you a positive result in a vacuum, by yourself, in the smallest unit of your family? If you only do this in your home, right? Because I pray in my home, and I pray with my family, and I pray with our small community, and the positive results are there in the home, whether or not anybody knows that we're praying or not. But that's not true of the Church of Woke, right? That's not true. Who am I dyeing my hair green for? Right? Every single one of these practices that I'm seeing out there that I know are going to fall away are completely dependent upon that the positive results come from a virtue signal. The positive results are not in and of themselves. Right? And so I think that's the message with that blood on the door. That's the message with tradition. That's the message with ritual, is that it's like, it works. The sacraments, the mysteries, they work regardless of who else sees you. And as a matter of fact, you should be doing them at the times when nobody can see you. That's when they're the most effective.
Pete, I know you have some thoughts.
I've had to give tradition a lot of thought recently. And Tommy Salmons from the Year Zero podcast and he's one of those guys who's constantly changing his thinking with new information, like everyone should. If you're just staying static, what are you going to, you're stuck in one place. We talked about how it seems like there's a concerted effort to get rid of tradition in this culture. When I go to Puerto Rico to visit family, there are still 3 generations living in the same house. And here, once our parent or grandparent gets sick, we send them to a warehouse. It's called the nursing home. And we forget about them in many cases, visit them on weekends when we can. And that's just not something that was done 100 years ago, probably maybe less. Definitely not in a lot of cultures. And it's made me realize that the last 100 years has really been, since the Federal Reserve, World War I especially. World War I was just to me, I don't care. It was a war on tradition, and it was going to institute international democracy and lead right into neoliberalism. And it just destroyed us. It's so funny that people say, well, we have democracy and, and now people have a voice. I'm like, isn't it really strange that since all of this democracy and all of, the world has gotten better, that governments around the world have killed more of their own people than like in all previous centuries combined? I think we failed along the way. And it's not to go back. We can't go back. I asked a question on Twitter, and I think I stole it from Yarvin. Was, would you rather live in 1900 with 2021 technology, or would you rather live in 2021 with 1900 technology? And of course, the autists automatically jumped in and said, "You mean we're going to have nuclear weapons?" And what was that question about? It was about culture. It was about tradition. That's all it was. And libertarians ignore culture and tradition at their own peril. And I love the fact that I was able to interview Dave in the last week and a half, and I asked him about religion. I asked him about what does he think about all of these atheists, how there are so many vocal atheists in libertarianism, and there always have been, but Mises, Rothbard, even Hoppe, they've never been antithetical to, they've never put down religion. They've never said critical of it. Rand was obviously a fiend and a monster when it came to that, and I think a lot of that has seeped in. But Dave said that he just thinks that these people, these evangelical atheists, are just childish, and they are. They're just childish. They almost make it so that, if you want to be a libertarian, you have to renounce your faith first. Like your faith, like faith, like libertarianism isn't a religion,
right?
Like any ideology isn't a religion. Any strict ideology is a religion. Come on, you have your tenets of faith. I mean, even look at wokeism. I mean, you have abortion is like, if you accept abortion, that's like your baptism, and then your Eucharist is accepting the carbon credits. I mean, it's all this stuff that can be related from religion right into people's ideology. And and then, like Carlos said in the chat earlier, he said, you surround yourself with people of stellar character. And he's just, that's Hoppe. That's what Hoppe's been saying. That's why so many libertarians hate Hoppe, because he's saying, no, you have to be, this isn't going to work unless there's a morality there, unless you're a good person, really. And yeah, tradition has been lost and it's been jettisoned and it's made fun of. Even in libertarianism, it's made fun of. It's almost the individualism. It's like I have all these books back here that I've read, all the great classic libertarian books, and they preach individualism. First of all, there's no such thing. You can't survive on your own. You can't. I'm sorry. You can argue with me all you want. You can't. But they pretend like it's individual, like it's an individual ideology. And just by saying that, people can instinctively figure out that it's a flawed ideology. It's like, well, no, family is important to people. Country is important to people. Blood and soil is important to people. to use a phrase no one wants to use.
You will not replace us, Pete. You will not replace us.
Even the very premise of property implies being part of a community. It's incoherent to talk about property as an individual. And that actually that gets us into one of the things that I really wanted to pick your brain about, Ven, was that something that was kind of coming to me, especially yesterday, as we were talking about it. Like one of the things you'd said that just really, this was just kind of a stop me in my tracks for a minute, was you said that Bitcoin doesn't eliminate fiat, it democratizes it. And that right there was just boom, a whole bunch of things all clicked for me when you said that. And it's things that are more in the philosophical, even like nature of Christ and the nature of the individual, and a bunch of things clicked for me with that. And a thing that was kind of, you didn't say this explicitly, but it feels like it was something I was putting together, and I wanted to try to think this through out loud with you here, which was that it's like Bitcoin as a system it's redefining what property is. And this was as I've been kind of like, okay, liberal. So then I've seen, like, I don't know if you were listening prior to when you hopped on, we were talking about capitalism and communism being just dialectic pairs of the two wings on the same bird. That isn't you haven't hit the base layer if you're talking capitalism versus communism. That ultimately they're two means to the same end, and that because they're born out of the premise of the individual and this isolated archetypical individual, which ultimately I think is, as I'm kind of putting these ideas together in real time, I'm coming to the conclusion that this is at least a manifestation of the spirit of Antichrist, which is the individual that is the center of the church of liberalism, which is reaching its apotheosis in the church of woke. This is secular Christianity. This is just a continuation of the Reformation, reforming, and it's starting to spiral itself out. But so I've had this idea of property and public property, private property baked into me as this is like the base layer of human interaction. This is an innate component of the human experience is private property. That this is just an inevitability about human organizations. And I started sort of questioning aspects of that as I was encountering the ideas of violence and realizing that a property claim is fundamentally a violent act. Because what you're saying when you say this is my property is you're saying I will fight you and kill you if necessary to retain possession of this, unless you provide me with incentive not to. That's what a property claim is ultimately secured by violence. And then the only thing that secures some violence is more violence. So violence is inherent in human society. And when you make a property claim, when you say this is my property, that's your property, what you're doing is you're creating a public declaration about what point at which you're going to engage in violence. So when you have this premise of private property as being kind of like an innate thing, that the ground that I stand on is I possess it when I'm here. All these different like super autistic debates that especially Rothbardians like to get into about the nature of property. And then you get the Marxists, or like you were saying before we went live, Pete, about Hoppe being 95% Marxist. These are they're from the same school of thought. So they get into the same basic kinds of arguments, just kind of from opposite perspectives. So with Bitcoin, with the nature of the structure of the system, it gives the ability to redefine what property actually is, and what it almost makes property unnecessary as a function. It renders that form of technology archaic. Like we don't need to make those declarations anymore, because there's a public visible system that we're all aware of. There's a digital scaling point where it's publicly acknowledged where the violence line is. It's all publicly assumed and acknowledged, and it's even self-enforceable because you can delegate the violent capacity away. So I don't know then how to. I almost don't know how to move forward with that. Like, so with Wealth, Power, and Influence, with the show and with the Nomad Network we just created, one of the things that we're talking about is we're starting to learn about like decentralized autonomous organizations, and the idea that you could create a network or an organization that pays people to increase the value of the organization. So it's you're paying people to pay you, and that this just completely. People that are talking about trying to take over a political party, I can't imagine spending your time on something so stupid and irrelevant. You're not just moving the chairs around the decks of the Titanic. You're like having a conversation about what color the paint should be on the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. We're moving into an era where things are going to transform really, really rapidly. And the people who understand this, who are beginning to adopt these practices, who are arranging themselves around these ideas, they're going to be the ones who are able to adapt and thrive through the process. Rather than trying to prevent it, they're the ones who can rise above it and kind of like skate the waves on top of the tsunami. So again, I guess there isn't a question in there necessarily, but I'm trying to think this through out loud. And Where am I right? Where am I wrong? What are the implications of this?
I think you're totally right in your description. And as a matter of fact, that's a pretty good approximation of, I would say, like the first quarter of my book, Self-Ownership. So that's a pretty good approximation in terms of the fact that an ownership claim is basically about violence. Or how I frame it that's a little bit different is violence is the default. So we see in non-human animals that ownership claims are settled immediately with violence, right? And that even certain species have developed it's so deeply embedded that they've developed biological adaptations for nothing else except for intra-species violence. The horns on a deer or on a ram, these exist for no other reason except to settle ownership claims, right? We wouldn't call it an ownership claim, and there's no reason to talk about ownership. It's just basically like, I'm here, I'm standing here, you want this thing, boom, 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 we go, whoever loses walks away. Now, that's the default that we can settle things as humans, and we do. Minus some system, right? Some system of justice, that's exactly how we settle it. By default, that's how human beings settle it too, right? It's going to be violence. So then, and that's the reason why my book is called Self-Ownership, the Foundation of Property and Morality. Because also that which we call morality is just the system that we have developed so that we don't have to do violence for property claims. If you really think about what we call morality, it's you participate in the system such that it doesn't have to come to violence every time. Why? Because you can't develop a civilization if every single time you need to settle a property claim, there's violence. So this should also help people to understand why Islam was such the mimetic virus that it was. Because it was a system that enabled disparate tribes that had no ruling authority over them, who before that were settling. There's a great story, I'm forgetting where I first heard it, some Islamic scholar who said, you have to understand the world that the Prophet Muhammad came into. He came into a world where there had been an intertribal war that had killed like hundreds or thousands of people that had been going on for like 4 or 5 generations over the results of a horse race. And it was so bad that the guy who was one of the racers in the horse race became a monk, like a Christian monk, because there were Christians around. This is pre-Islam. Became a monk because of how guilty he felt about all of the bloodshed that was a result of him being part of this horse race. That's the world Muhammad came into. So when people are like Sharia law, Sharia law, and it's like, these dudes united Afghanistan. Do you understand how basically impossible that is to do? A bunch of tribes that have no central authority, and that some guy 1,400 years ago, I'm going to say probably inspired by God, okay? To be able to come up with a system that can catch like that, I'm going to say human being can't think that up, okay? I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Now, I'm not, as an Orthodox Christian, I'm not going to say that everything that he said is right, but I'm going to say probably Holy Spirit probably involved in this one, okay? In one way or another. And so this is our idea of property. So where I get to in self-ownership, this was part of why when I started thinking about Bitcoin, I had already written the book. And then it was in writing the book that I was like, there's this thing with Bitcoin. I had the name Render Unto Caesar before I was done with my second book, Self-Ownership, because as I was looking at ownership and the prerequisites for ownership, I looked and I was like, according to this framework that I've laid out, which I feel very good about, you can't own anything associated with Bitcoin. And basically what I break down to, we have like Lockean original appropriation, this idea that where does property come from? Property is a natural resource mixed with labor, and then it becomes your property, right? This is what we say. But from there, it's all about provenance. So we say, how do I know the ownership? How do I know that I own this microphone? Well, the idea is that whoever I bought it from owned it, and then whoever they bought it from owned it, and then whoever made it owned the parts, and then all of this, and we can trace it back to eventually natural resource and labor, and that was the original owner. So it's like, well, here's all this provenance. We don't own the natural resource, but when we add labor, we add ownership. What does that mean? That's got to mean that we own, that the labor is where the ownership is. So in other words, the ownership property must begin with the labor. This is the real meaning of self-ownership. What we own, all we own, the kernel of all of that is our labor. And then it's like, well, that's the point where you get into the mystery. Because now you're getting into consciousness. Well, where do my thoughts come from? Where does my attention come from? Where does all of this come from? So you can see my path towards orthodoxy. But even in that book, even in my second book, I end at basically saying it's a divine mystery. That if you start drawing it back to who's the original owner, you're going to end up with the spark of the divine. That's it. So what is Bitcoin then? And this is what we talked about. Bitcoin is a system that is about labor. It's about recording and measuring labor in a way that we never could before. The quantum of labor. This is something that Ricardo was saying, we need to find this. Marx was saying, we need to find this. Menger was saying, we need to find this. And Menger was basically saying, we can't find it. And because we can't find a quantum of labor, Marx's prescriptions cannot work. They cannot work because they require that you can measure what everybody gave into the economy before you give it out, right? From each according to his ability. Well, how do you measure that? If you can't measure the quantum of labor, Bitcoin measures it. It's called a hash. And so the value is the value of labor. So we found a way to have reusable proof of work, to prove that work is done and then to reuse it. This is why people say digital gold and all of this, but it's like, no. Gold is a manifestation of this concept. Because I have the gold in my hand is the proof that someone somewhere expended labor to dig into a mountain and find gold, because gold is difficult to find. And the more I find and bring out, the more labor has to be done. And we can know this to be true. Bitcoin takes that. So it's not that Bitcoin is digital gold. It's that gold is the manifestation in the physical world of a principle of nature, of a natural law. And Bitcoin just takes the natural law by itself. That is a law about value, and that is a law about labor and the relationship between value and labor. And it puts it into a system that we can all agree upon without any physical, tangible thing. Okay, where we can run this simulation and be sure about it. And the tangible thing that we use is these numbers that are in cryptography that we've only had access to since the 70s. And so that's where it's almost as though, again, Bitcoin is one of these splits that like property solves a problem, but Bitcoin solves the same problem that property solves without the need for going down the property road. It's the helicopter versus the airplane. They both get you into the air. They're both aircraft, but they operate on completely different rules.
The helicopter doesn't need a runway.
Well, the helicopter generates lift and thrust in a completely different way.
But it's like the plane. The plane requires, like, if you're going to use a plane, well, then now you need to have a runway. You need to have space. You need to have open space. Whereas with the helicopter, you don't need that. The helicopter can just take off from the spot where you are right now.
Well, but also with an airplane, you can it can lose engine power and you can still survive. Right? That's not going to happen. So there's these trade-offs.
Yeah.
But those trade-offs come from a different set of rules. And so to try to put this property thing, the rules of property on top of Bitcoin, you basically stop Bitcoin dead in its tracks. It's just like trying to engineer a helicopter and your presuppositions is, oh, we need wings for lift. You can never engineer a helicopter. You can never get any use out of a helicopter if your presupposition is we need wings for lift. So whenever somebody's like, Bitcoin is money, Bitcoin is digital gold, it's like you've stopped Bitcoin right here where it is. You can't move any further with it. And so this is the key, and the understanding of property is that, like, we can still have the morality, but it's going to be different morality.
Yeah.
Because it's all voluntary. Like violence doesn't actually help when we're dealing with these numbers. Sure, you could have a $5 wrench attack where you like, you know, try to get somebody, but you can't do the sorts of things where it's like, unless you are at the person and unless you can extract it out of their head through torture, you're not getting the shit, right? But if I've got gold in a safe in my house, you can wait till I'm gone. You don't even need to deal with me. You can just detain me or even just bring overwhelming force and you don't even need to touch me. I might just be like, I don't want to get shot, kick down the door, grab my property and steal it. But the amount of expense, psychological and financial, that you would have to expend to extract private keys from out of somebody's head is, on a mass scale, can never be done. Can never be done. So you're in a voluntary situation at that point. Like you can't do it without violence, basically.
What popped into my head as you were starting to explain that is you said you reduced everything down to labor, and we've now created like a unit of labor. And what is labor except for praxis? The labor is the praxis.
Well, and it's attention. I think an important thing an important way to look at it is attention, and it's especially important now because we're in an attention economy. And what it helps you to understand, like I tweeted the other day, that the algorithm is the principality of the adversary. And this is the truth, because what is the algorithm trying to do? It's trying to get your attention so that it can sell it. It is trafficking in YouTube, Google, Twitter, Facebook. They traffic in human attention. And the algorithm is there to harvest. It is farming your attention.
Your attention is your power.
Your attention is your labor. Because all that labor is conscious, is human action that's conscious. So in other words, you are using your body to do something in a conscious way, giving attention. So everybody who's watching this is laboring. Now, the degree to which they're laboring is not super, super great, but they're also not selling your attention for high amounts, right? They're looking for, that's why that you need to have millions of views, billions of views, trillions of views in order for these companies to be profitable, right? So what it really, and then you look at, okay, why did I say it's the principality of the adversary? Well, if you're giving your attention to this, if you're giving your attention to free porn, if you're giving your attention to whatever the wokes have on tap for you, you are not giving your attention to something that can benefit you. And that is the only, like you say, that is your wealth. We need to start looking at our attention as our wealth. And your attention is worth more the more skills you have. Mm-hmm. Your attention is worth more the more actual things you could be doing instead that would be giving value to the world, market value, right? Becoming a person of value is the key. But as long as you're giving your attention to the algorithm, and it's very good at getting your attention, and that's why it's the adversary. You've sold your soul, literally. You are literally selling your soul for what? For what? So that's the best way to look at it. And Bitcoin is all about attention, right? When those machines are hashing, that's attention. Somebody had to pay to put those miners, to give incredible attention to put those miners up and to keep them running. There's a lot of human attention at a very high price point that's being put into that. So that's the way to think about it. Like, don't just give away your attention. Don't just give away your eyeballs unless you're really getting something back.
That right there would be my response to the people who say, when we talk about the LPMC, they're like, well, why don't you just do it your way and they'll do it their way? When they're doing it their way, they're making this sacrifice. They're doing this trade-off where they're giving their attention to something fundamentally unproductive. So they don't get that back. That's a zero-sum exchange that they're never going to get back. And my goal is not to, I've said this, and I'm going to keep saying this so people are aware of this. My goal is not to change their minds. My goal is not to make the LPMC do something different. My goal is to get the attention of people who might get sucked into that. and to tell them, to show them there are many better ways, but there is one in particular. There's many ways to do the one, which is, like you said, improve your own value, improve your own human capacity through your network, your net worth, your skills, your talents, your community. And that's actually another point that I was trying to reason through this, is, again, thinking and coming from the perspective of, the individual, private property, capitalism, communism, all these sorts of models that we try to place over the world and try to make the world make sense with these models. Part of the nature of Bitcoin as a system is that if you think of yourself as an individual and you think of yourself as that you're in this for your own gain, the system can capitalize on that. There's an incentive structure there where you can be, speaking of Rand, you can be pursuing your self-interest, and the system will alchemize that into benefits for the community. But your whole life doesn't exist within the internet or within a network of code. You have to actually engage with people around you. And part of the system, I was listening to Macro Voices had this fantastic conversation with a couple of people, but one of them was a lady named Dr. Pippa Malmgren. And I need to go see some more stuff, the stuff that she says, because she had some really interesting takes. But one of the things she was pointing out is that through things like these central bank digital currencies that you talk about, there's going to be the capacity to actually employ true democracy, where baked into the system will be the capacity for people to vote for something, to vote for specific policies, and they can be rewarded by the system for making the right votes. So politicians can actually, here, have an extra $10,000 for voting for my campaign. That capacity will be baked in there. And we were talking before you came on, Vin, about how libertarians don't realize just how unpopular they are, and that if you're turning this into a popularity contest, you're vastly outnumbered. And we're moving into an era where if you haven't gotten yourself extracted from these central bank digital currencies, and even if you have, this is still going to be the case, that ultimately you're going to have to be seen by your community as someone who is invested in his community or her community. Because if you're not, if you act as an individual, you're going to get kicked out. You're going to be cut off from there's actually going to be a mechanism, a non-violent mechanism for eradicating you from society. If you prove yourself as someone who is not invested in the tribe. So this breaks and it's all going to be entirely voluntary. And frankly, you can make a good argument that you will have violated a social contract. You want to benefit from the system. You want to benefit from it without agreeing to the same rules that everyone else is agreeing to. So they're going to throw you off the system. That's their right. It's their system. If you're using these outdated property models, you're going to miss this sort of dynamic. That ultimately, to survive as an extreme minority with views that another minority is absolutely hostile to and will use whatever system necessary to eradicate, it's in your you were incentivized. It's in your best interests to abandon the talk of I'm an individual, self-interest, and liberty of the individual. All these sorts of things. These are all signals to the algorithm that you're someone to be eradicated from the system. That you are someone who cannot participate.
Well, there is an argument to be made, I think, for individual liberty, but they're making the wrong argument. So yeah, the argument to be made is, and see, in order to make this legitimately, people will know whether or not this is true. Mm-hmm. Because this is fundamentally the argument that all politicians are making. And the argument is, look, I need for you to make me free. I need you to take the fetters off of me. I need you to give me free reign, because when you give me free reign, you can be assured that all of you will benefit more than if my hands are tied. And this is what every politician is fundamentally saying, and this is what libertarians should be saying. Now, that is actually acting as an individual. And that is actually radical individualism. Actually, that's the most radical individualism. It's radical individualism so much so that it's like, no, I don't actually even care about liberty for everybody else. I only care about liberty for me. But I know, and I have demonstrated, that I feel that my interests are best served when you are happy and healthy, right? Happy wife, happy life. And where you see it is you see it in the family. So you see how somebody uses, and why small communities, tight communities, and families are important, is that you're like, what happens when the patriarch is unfettered? What happens when the chief, you don't bother him? He's like, hey, stop. Just listen to what I'm saying right here. Just do what I'm saying. Are you better off or are you worse off? See, that becomes obvious very quickly. Very quickly, and also consistently. So it's not like the individuals for whom it's true that like, oh, well, he had this one thing where we let him have his way and everything went right. It doesn't work that way. How it works is the person who gets it right when they get their way, consistent. There'll maybe be some exception, but you'll be able to be like, yeah, but this thing happened and this was unpredictable. But on average, wise king. Right? The wise king is the most free person. And the other one who has to constantly be working is the tyrant. Well, why does the tyrant have to be constantly giving you vaccine mandates and mask mandates and all of this? Well, you look around and you're like, dude, everything failed. You said to do this and it failed. It wouldn't have to be a mandate if you would have said to do it and it worked. If you would have said to do, it's 2 weeks to stop the spread, and we do 2 weeks and the spread stops, and then 5 years from now, you're like, we need to do 2 weeks to stop the spread. You don't even need a mandate. People will be even more hardcore to do the 2 weeks. They'll do it, but they'll be begging you like, hey man, when do we do the 2 weeks to stop the spread? Remember how we did it last time? They'll be like, we're ready. We're stocked up. We're ready to go. Let's go. It's a party. It worked last time. We're going to do it again this time. And so this is what, if the Libertarian Party, what they should be saying is like, okay, we want to give, because look, that's the real Ron Paul revolution. Give Ron Paul the freedom to do all the things Ron Paul wants to do. Isn't that what everybody's saying? That it's Ron Paul was right. He was right again. He was right about everything. Oh, meaning if we just would have unfettered him, he was fettered. He wasn't free. We give him all the freedom in the world, and the problem gets fixed. Okay, what do we get if we give Dave Smith all the freedom in the world? Right? Present to me the person who is so worthy that all we need to do is unfetter them. And that's your Libertarian Party. That's your Libertarian Party. That by unfettering this one person, everybody else's fetters are ripped off. They don't have to do anything else. They don't have to wake up. They don't have to learn anything. They don't have to do any of these things. It's like, I want you to be free. You don't need to do anything except free me, and I will make you free. That's the message. That's it.
Pete.
Where's Andrew? Andrew's the guy I want to unfetter. And it's what we were talking about yesterday. And it's what Andrew's been saying. He's like, look, you don't need a revolution. You just need a plan. You need something that works. And you need something that people are going to buy into, that everyone's going to buy, that everyone's going to see value in. And if you're, I don't know if you said this or if Andrew said it, but if you're relying on having to gather all these people in order to make change, it's not going to happen because, well, everybody's going to have different ideas. Everybody's going to have different motivations. But if you bring in the king to do it all, there you go. All everybody has to do is get behind that one guy. God, this sounds like it's going backwards, but yet we have to move forwards. And that's something I was talking about tradition. I was talking about how terrible it was that, we lost so much 100 years ago. But really, we can't go back. We have to go forward, but we need to carry that forward with us. If we're going into a new paradigm, what Jason talks about, new. Andrew's in the house now. He must have heard me.
His ears were tingling.
If we're going to go forward and we're going to build new systems, and those systems are going to work for everyone who wants it to work for them, we're going to have to bring that tradition with us. And because it's not going to work without it, it's going to turn into, like you said, it's going to turn into a technocracy. Without the tradition, it's going to turn into just the experts rule. I mean, that's where we would be headed, and that's where we're headed now. I mean, look at the last 18 months. It's like it's all the experts. We have an expert for this, we have an expert for that, and the problem is that fact checkers. I mean, Fauci. Someone could be like, well, you're talking about putting one guy in charge. We put Fauci in charge. Just like Fauci's not in charge. The people who give Fauci millions and have been giving Fauci millions and millions of dollars for over 50 years, while he's killing AIDS patients in the 80s, and now he's responsible for the deaths of a whole bunch, for hundreds of thousands of people here. It's not Fauci, it's the people behind it. You need one person. And hi, Andrew, to come in and say, hey, this is how we'll do it, and let's move forward. I mean, he's the only one I've seen. He's the only one I've seen who's put up a actual political solution. I think Hoppe too, in what must be done, but Andrew seems to be working within the Hoppe framework and just tweaking some stuff, because I mean, that was 25 years ago. Some things have changed, and I like the ideas. But yeah, it's one person, and like it's mentioned Hoppe again. It always goes back to a king. You'd rather have one person who is going to, and then you go to formalism, where that one person gets all the blame if everything goes wrong. You know who to blame.
But I think the important thing here, and this goes back to the idea of there is a very limited set of the right action and an infinite set of the wrong action. And so when we're thinking about, we need to be very, very careful. And if anything, I will just be honest in terms of the discussion and in terms of Andrew. Hey, Andrew, like, I think you're right on a lot of things, but the problem is that it isn't that we need a king. Like, it isn't that a king is the right answer. And this is where I diverge from Hoppe as well, because it's like, yeah, it's kind of true that a king is the answer, but if you don't see that it's not just a king, it's the right king. Mm-hmm. So it goes back to the same thing about, like, something needs to be done to stop my car from making this noise. I need to take some action on the engine. And it's like, yes, an action does need to be taken regarding the engine. However, there is an infinite set of wrong actions that will make this worse. So in other words, there's an infinite set of individuals who have placed there will make it worse. And me to make the decision, or you to, and then we're like, well, who makes the decision? Right? And we already are like, well, if democracy is the God that failed, then we're going to say that crowdsourcing this idea, that the wisdom of the crowds is already bullshit. Okay, so then who? Because in my opinion, any person who would say that they are qualified to make that choice is automatically disqualified from making that choice. Okay? They already lack the humility to understand the difficulty of making such a choice. So now we're in a situation, aren't we? But the situation's been solved. The King of Kings. It can't be a human king. This is the key. And that when you have a system where, when everybody turns, even the priest in an Orthodox ceremony, for most of it, is facing the iconostasis, or is facing the high point, or is facing the altar, is facing God, Christ, the King of Kings, along with the people. Okay? Everybody's on this thing because, and this is the same reason why with Islam, they're praying towards Mecca. Everybody's praying towards the Kaaba, right? And when what do we do? Well, what did the prophet say to do? Either in the Quran or when he was talking to his companions and they wrote it down in a hadith. And they study, was this legitimate? Was this not legitimate? Because it can't be a human being It cannot be. It has to be some system that has emerged, some system of practice, and then the practice in and of itself becomes the filter by which we know who should be included and who should not be included in our voluntary society. It's that. It's like, look, here's the deal. We're all going to turn in this one direction. There's the king. This is our king. We're going to worship this king on a daily basis. Then we're all going to come, and in our homes and whatever, we're all going to come and worship on a regular basis in this temple. We're going to worship this king. This is where we can come and meet him. We're going to follow these things. And if we follow all of those things, we're good to go. We've got a king. Done. Problem solved. Problem solved. The second that you institute a ruler, a human ruler, done. And this was the split of the Orthodox and the Catholics. This was why the East split from the West. That exact idea, right? That it's like, oh, you're going to have a supreme human ruler? Guess what's going to happen, guys? And guess what happened? Look at the history. Predictable. And so this is the one place that I think you need to go all the way. It's not just a king is the right choice. Yes, a king is the right choice. Okay, now go further. What king? Who's the individual? No individual. Who's qualified to make that choice? No one's qualified to make that choice. Even Marcus Garvey said this. This is how you get Rastafarians. Because Marcus Garvey said, look to Africa, find a king, crown him. Like, don't try to come up with your own king. Find a monarchy that's already proven itself to exist. Find a monarchy that's been there for a long time. That's why they chose Haile Selassie in Ethiopia, right? That's an ancient monarchy that traces back to Melchizedek. So that's why they were like, oh, boom, there you go, Haile Selassie. This is the same thing that we need to do. We don't have that, right? We don't have a monarchy to look to except for the monarchy of the kingdom of God. And this is the reason why, in an emergent way, right at this moment, everybody, not everybody, but enough people, a lot of people are finding their path toward that. And that's the reason. Even if they don't know it, that's what's happening.
When I called the show King Pilled, and when people have asked me what the King Pill is, it's actually, you just explained it about as well as I've imagined it. As I've struggled to make it like pithy. I've struggled to, like, how do you put this on a bumper sticker? Like, you can't. This isn't. I gave up a long time ago on having an audience of people that would just accept things that are on bumper stickers. Like I'm looking for quality, not quantity. And to me, when I hear what you're talking about, you have the King of Kings, and that, yes, get to the point of the king and then go beyond it. Going beyond it to me is that each one of us is called to behave as a king, to behave as the person with the responsibility. You are given a responsibility. You are born into responsibility, and you are called to fulfill that responsibility. Whoever fulfills responsibility the most or the best will be given more. And as you're given more, you fulfill that, you're given more. So there's a natural process whereby the man who fulfills the most responsibility will be the one who finds himself as the king. And he won't want it. He won't want to be there. But he's the one everyone else is looking to. So he needs to find someone to look to. And that's how you get a king of kings. There's when you say King of Kings, there's multiple kings being referred to there. There is a king, and then there's all of the other kings who are all responsive to him. And you get this fractal model where ultimately the king is the father. The king is the father of his tribe, of his community, of his city, of his whatever the scale is. This sort of model gets corrupted at scale with humans. So you return to we were talking about the Dunbar's number, and actually this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but I mentioned before you came on then that I had a thought when we were talking about Dunbar's number over the weekend that I wonder if the model of the fourth turning works the way it does in all of those models, all those 4-part models, function on a generational level, because if you assume each couple, each pair of people have 3 or 4 children, you reach the Dunbar's number at about between the third and fourth generation. You've reached that. Your tribe has expanded beyond.
Wow. Yeah, probably.
And that's you see this pattern in so many ways that I think there's a lot of things that feed into it. But I wonder if that's what started that cycle. Because eventually, by the time you get to the fourth generation, not many people know their great grandparents. By the time you get to that level, as you get to the next generation after that, you're completely detached. This is why you need traditions that carry knowledge through these generations, even after people have died. And what I've wondered is how the internet is going to change this. Because through the internet, people are able to encounter generations that they never would have been able to encounter before. They're going to be preserved in some sense. And so I've wondered, is this going to accelerate that cycle? Is it going to, because the cycle also exists fractally as well. I guarantee you that if you zoomed out to the 50,000 year level, you would see this fourth turning cycle. I feel confident that
100%. Yeah, there's no question. Big ones and small ones.
Right. So again, I like this just ties in all of this stuff. It ties in tradition. It ties in the King of Kings, and so then the tradition that will bind generations together, the best, the one that's the most adaptive, will by definition be the one that persists the longest. It's Lindy.
But tradition is praxis, right?
Yes.
Not knowledge. So that's one thing, is that like the internet is actually reducing praxis. While it increases the availability of knowledge, because it increases the availability of knowledge, it reduces the praxis. So in other words, if you've got a culture where they have an oral tradition, the amount of time spent by each individual preserving that tradition through praxis, storytelling, singing, memorization, all of these things is incredibly high. As versus one that has written, it gets lower. And then when you go to like, oh, it's just on my phone that I can get the data at any time. I mean, think about just memorizing phone numbers, man. Right? I'm from a generation where I had probably 30 to 40 when I was a kid, 30 to 40 phone numbers memorized of friends, family, all of this. I can struggle to remember my wife's number because it's one that people will ask like, oh, well, what's her number or whatever. And I have to maybe give it to somebody filling out a form or something. And maybe I remember my like mother's number because it's from before that time. And my childhood, I still know my childhood house number, right? But beyond that, do I know any numbers? Absolutely not. And so like we have to consider that it's actually we have to fight harder in order to preserve tradition. Whereas before, when it was just praxis that these traditions would be preserved, whether or not we know, like I can go and read and see the entire liturgy. I can go and do all of this. It's no problem. But it's like, because of that, I won't remember it. So then when it's memory hold, it's actually a huge point of failure. Most information right now is highly centralized. Important information, most of it is highly centralized because why would you duplicate it? If it's in a high quality location like Wikipedia, why would I think to duplicate it?
That's a really, really interesting point. So it's causing degradation. An excess of knowledge is causing a degradation of praxis. And it's interesting thinking about that the eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was basically getting unearned knowledge. That's what it was. It was getting knowledge without the praxis. The internet, in a sense, is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but it's in a sense also it's the tree of life. There's both of these patterns map onto it. This gets the last subject that I had on my mind that I hoped we would get to was Pete. You said something in our chat the other day about being a preterist. And then you said some of this stuff is making you is making you like question your fundamentals. And so I came from my background, my Christian background was as a Seventh-day Adventist, which is obviously Adventist. There's a lot of emphasis on eschatology. So I grew up studying and reading Daniel and Revelation a lot, and like memorizing these patterns extensively. And I was involved in evangelism. I was going door to door with people, knocking on doors, giving Bible studies, bringing people to evangelistic series, like all this kind of stuff. And then throughout my 20s, I kind of just moved away from all of it. There was something about it that didn't, there's all kinds of different things. We won't go into that now. But so the eschatology that's baked into my consciousness, I just naturally have realized that I'm living under this assumption that Jesus is coming soon and the world as we know it is coming to an end. And then I think Adventism is premillennial I was trying to remember which one's which, but I've had that just baked into me where it's just this natural assumption that we're in the end times at any time, it's going to be, with the next, 50 years or so, if at the, could possibly be more than that. And I see these kinds of patterns and I see them moving in a direction where I don't understand how they don't become self-terminating. I don't understand how some of these patterns can play themselves out. Like we don't have anywhere else to go on the planet physically. Now there's a lot of room to maneuver and explore digitally, but the physical world is there's constraints that don't exist in the digital world, obviously. So, again, I don't have a question here necessarily, but I'm completely new to the ideas of preterism. Pete, I'm familiar. I understand what it is, but I've never actually tried that on. I've never actually seen through those goggles and seen the world that way. And as I look at these cycles that are just repeating themselves over and over and over again, I'm like, how far out do I zoom? How far out? At what point does the cycle persist? Is there a point where it terminates? Do either of you guys have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I became a preterist because I recognize those cycles as well. They just seem to be happening over and over and over again. Also, recognizing the bad. Everybody was making these predictions. What was it? 88 reasons the rapture is going to happen in 1988 or something like that. And how, then the Left Behind book series became so huge, and Hal Lindsey and all these just awful, awful, awful people who just made all these predictions. And I would look at this and I'd be like, so basically they're acting as a prophet. And what happens to a false prophet in the Old Testament? But everybody's forgetting. And then I remembered the whole Y2K thing. And I was doing accounting at a Christian bookstore at that point. And they were selling all these Y2K books. And all these pastors from around the country were getting rich off of these Y2K books and why it was going to signal the end. And then it came and went. And no one held them accountable. And that's when I just started. I found a book called the Parousia by J. Stuart Russell. He wrote it in like 1850, something like that. And as soon as I started talking about it, people were like, "Oh, you're talking about Russell from the Jehovah's Witnesses." I'm like, "No, different guy. This guy's a Brit and everything. So calm down. It's quit with the ad hominems." And I just started looking through it, and I became convinced that it's all cycles, and that when you read Revelation, that you shouldn't be reading it with a newspaper in one hand. And, you shouldn't have the Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other. And then I started like looking at the history of dispensationalism, and I saw that it was like founded in like 1820, and I'm like, for something that's 2,000 years old, I don't think I'm going to be buying much into like the late teachings of it, because the late teachings are probably going to be the worst teachings. And I just came to the conclusion that it looks to me like we're here. It looks to me like we're here, and we need to make the best of it. But those cycles they're evident to anybody who can see, who's looking. And I think we just have to deal with them and look to the past for help in dealing with them too. Of course, it's not going to, the leap in technology that we've seen in, I would say since the bomb, it just seems like I know why so many people like allegedly at one point, somebody was at NASA and asked Werner von Braun, he said, do you believe in aliens? And he like pointed at all the file cabinets and everything. And he said, yeah, it's all right there. Like he was implying that all that technology, that everything that was in there was, was given to him from somewhere else. But the leap, I think that what caused a lot of people, well, obviously what caused so many people to become dispensationalists was Israel becoming a nation again. They lament that the temple has not been rebuilt, and Christians forgive the crimes of Israel because they know Jesus won't come back unless the temple is rebuilt and they start sacrificing again, or at least that's their interpretation. But I just don't. I think we're here. I think we need to make the best of it, and to live like somebody's somebody's coming to save us. In like the rapture or Jesus is coming back, and is to live like the LP is going to save us, because it's just it's the same. I have the same confidence in both of them. Even if you take like, oh, you won't know the time or place, that kind of thing. Well, that's great and everything, but those people in the first century really thought he was coming back like then. When you read Acts and you read, they really thought he was coming back like at that time. I find it hard to believe that the people who wrote the Bible were so wrong about that.
Maybe they weren't wrong. Yeah. I mean, it's we only have our life to live, obviously. And I mean, the story that's being told is one of the fact that, Christ is going to come back to judge the living and the dead. So it is that like all of our judgment is going to happen at the same time. But it also is assuming that there will be people who are dead, right, at the time that happens. And once you're dead, does it matter whether it's a day or whether it's 1,000 years? And so like the soteriology, like the salvation aspect of it is supposed to be individual salvation. But the individual salvation is supposed to be, at least as far as I can tell, that the individual salvation is supposed to be the fact that you're not worried about somebody coming back to save you at some future time, but that you're looking to be saved in the moment from the things that are happening at that moment. And if there's ever been a time in my lifetime when the salvation has been needed, it's this very moment, because people are being given a choice that, at least in the West, I mean, there was certainly times in communists, certainly I think Russia, right? And in the modern age, 1917 was a big one, that it's like, and then in China, but I think Russia even more so because of the layers of they had an advanced culture. It wasn't there were peasant farmers, but outside of that, the church in and of itself was hyper advanced in Russia. It had been there for 1,000 years going on at that point. And so the fact that there was like sign an oath of allegiance. And I mean, hundreds of thousands of clergy were killed, executed. Millions of Christians were executed, basically religious persecution by the Soviets. We never talk about this. There was a Christian Holocaust there. This is real. This happened. Churches destroyed, tons of them, thousands. This is something that's not discussed. We're in this time again. Now we're starting to see people who are like, well, I agreed to the 2 woke pokes, but I'm not going to agree to the 3rd. And it's like, on what basis? On what basis are you not agreeing to the 3rd? Right? Because you voluntarily went and got the 2 when it was still voluntary. There hasn't been a mandate yet. It was still, well, to keep my job. Okay, well, keep your job. It's still voluntary. Your job is voluntary. You could have quit your job. So at this point, it's like, well, you obviously have, keep your job is not a moral or ethical claim. Because a moral or ethical claim would be like, actually fire me. Fire me. So you have no moral or ethical claim left. You've already been baptized. You've already pledged allegiance to the faith. And now by saying you're not going to take the third, you're just an apostate. You're just being disagreeable. You're just being selfish. You're just, it's your own aesthetic preference, and you don't care about anybody else, even though you've already shown by your praxis. Forget about what you believe. I know what you believe. I know that you believe it's not that dangerous. It's not an existential threat to your life. And I know that you believe that it's moral and ethical because you've done it. It doesn't violate your morals. It doesn't violate your ethics. So number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, ad infinitum, you have nothing. You can't stop now. And this is the reason why if you're not answering to a king, if you have it, like, pick a king now. Be a radical individual and pick your king now, right now. Follow your king. Let's not talk about a monarchy that we're going to set up sometime in the future when we get some private land and we do all of this and we have a free private city and we've got all this. Pick your king now, because you need your king now. You don't need your king 2 months from now. You need a moral system and an ethical system where you're like, you know what? Fire me. I follow my king. You know what? I can't get on the internet anymore. Screw it. I follow my king. I fear my king more than I fear what you're going to do. All the way down to exactly why those priests got killed. Hundreds of thousands of clergy. Readers, they have various levels of clergy. Readers, deacons, subdeacons, priests, monks. Literally every day in the Eastern Orthodox faith, there's lists of new martyrs from that time, and the year are commemorated every single day. Lists. What all they had to do was sign. It was still called the Russian Orthodox Church, as a matter of fact. They just had to say, well, we follow this particular patriarch, who apostolic succession, he could claim that too. All they had to do, and you know what they said? Glory to God for everything. It's over. If it's over, it's over. Glory to God for everything. I will not sign. Boom! While they watched lines of priests, watched each other. First monk, will you? Will you sign? No. Boom. Now you. Will you sign? No. Boom. Now will you sign? Glory to God. Boom. Now will you sign? Glory to God. Boom. Why? They picked their king. They picked their king. None of this will end until a critical mass pick their king. None of this will end. That's the only way. So it's like right now, we could talk about the reason why it is this and all of that, but no, you got to do it today for you. And it's got to be that you're willing to die for. Find the king you're willing to die for, because that's the only way it stops. And it's not that you're willing to die, meaning you're going to pick up a gun and go shoot somebody. It's that you're willing to die when they show up that other people will see. That's it. That's the only way.
What got me thinking along those lines was recognizing the apocalyptic sense that I had, this sense of, oh, we're right at the end, and then recognizing that dynamic in the people who are, I mean, our conversation with Clint, we spent half the time talking about martyrdom. And people are that are going into this LPMC thing, I see that sense that, we're almost at the end. We're coming up to the end. So now is the time where we're going to go martyr ourselves, throw ourselves against the rock, and the Deus Ex Machina is going to show up at the last minute. And because we were true to our principles, because we went and made martyrs of ourselves, we'll be okay. It'll all be okay. They're going to come in and they're going to swoop in and save us at the last minute. Whether they actually consciously recognize that or not, I can hear that in them when they're talking. I can hear that.
But it's a LARP, dude.
It's 100% a LARP.
You hear it, but it's a LARP because they won't.
Right.
It's not worth it.
Right.
These people
it's not worth dying
they're too
for.
smart. No, they're too. I know who these people are. It's like, look, dude, you don't believe that about the LP. You don't think that the Libertarian Party is worth dying for. Let's be real. Come on. And if it's not worth dying for, and that's the eschatology. Like, that's where it's at. Is that it's like, look, if this is the end, okay, you better, somebody's going to die. pick what it's worth dying for. If you really in your heart are like, that's not worth dying for, walk away. Clear the space out of your soul. Clear the bandwidth up so that you can actually find the thing that is worth dying for. Because the wokes are choosing what's worth dying for. If what the scientists on the other side are saying is true, in 2 years, we're going to see a bunch of them start dropping dead. Or maybe we see a bunch of them unable to have children. Right? So everybody's choosing what they're going to die for. This is the what you're going to die for time. Right? That's what the end time is. 6 million ways to die. Choose one. But at the same time, what a blessing. What a blessing to be forced into a situation where you have to really sit and think about what's truly valuable, what's truly worth dying for. That's a blessing, dude, because right now, that's the meme. That's the Coomer in his basement. That's a guy who hasn't chose what to die for, right? Isn't that the Nordic Chad? Isn't that really like so many of those memes where it's like, if you don't do this, we're coming for you. And then he scrolls up and he's like, good. You know what I mean? That's what it is that it's like, I'm ready. I'm living my life and I'm ready. If that's what you need to come and do, let's do it. With the LP, that is 100% LARP. 100%.
There was a thing that popped into my mind earlier, and this is totally like a completely oblique move. And then we should probably wrap up. We're coming up on 3 hours here, but there was a thought that occurred to me while you were talking earlier. So I was listening to this video recently, talking to an Orthodox priest, and it was a Protestant guy. I don't remember what his background was, but he's talking to an Orthodox priest, and they're talking about salvation. And obviously, I think the guy was Reformed. I think he was coming from a Reformed background, and so obviously there's a pretty big debate in that. And my goal isn't, I'm not trying to debate it right now. Just a takeaway I had was that Orthodox priest said, he said, apart from the Orthodox perspective, he says, I like something like, I hesitate to say, yes, this theory of atonement is the correct one. This is it and no more. He said, the way that there's so many different analogies that are used throughout the Bible and so many different ways that it's explained, that you can make a case for many of them, but to fit all of them into a single paradigm it's a mystery. This is, you were talking about the sacrament. It's a mystery. So you can look at all of these different perspectives as they're different illustrations or different ways to understand the divine secret. And my thought was with Bitcoin, when people say, well, it's digital gold, or they say, oh, well, it's cash, or it's the store value, or a means of exchange, or it's kind of like, well, yes, but also. And I saw there's a parallel with those two things where it's yes, but also. Yes, but also. And when you're trying to force it into a specific frame, you're missing the context, and you're losing the fact that you talk about eschatology, and we think of ourselves, we abstract away from ourselves, and we think in these like universal terms, like we have our universal human consciousness. I mean, in terms of eschatological time, I'm going to live for 80 to 100 years. I'm in my own end times. From the moment that I'm born, I am in my own end times. So this isn't like, well, now we need to be concerned about eschatology because look at all these things. The cycle repeats itself over and over again. You're always in the end times. So you have to act like it. Act like you're in the end times and pick a king. Because when you were talking, I was thinking, this to say, oh, I'm a radical individual, that's why I'm not going to get the shot. I'm a radical individual. You are creating the storyline. Radical individual threatens the rest of the population. 100% of the population is going to be on board with, yeah, that's a radical individual. He's a dangerous person. Get him out. Get him away from us. Do whatever necessary to get rid of him. You are literally signing your own death warrant when you talk about, oh, I'm a radical individual and individualism and that framing it misses the mark. That's it, that framing misses the mark, and so by default, you will miss the mark as well. And either of you guys have any closing thoughts, and we'll wrap this up.
I thought that was great, man.
Great. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you for joining me for this. This was a lot of fun. Thank you to the audience for joining us. The chat has been fantastic as always. Our chat is just popping in here. And do me a favor, like this show, share, subscribe. Like I've said before, though, if you're going to share it with someone who you think is going to benefit from it and who you think is inclined to agree with it. I'm not out here trying to evangelize people. I'm trying to talk to people who are already inclined to listen to what I have to say. And then when I bring people on the show like this, I want to create an echo chamber of people who are all thinking about these things and they value these things in the same way that I do. So like, share, subscribe, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code King. And then also you can go to subscribestar.com/kingpilled and you can sign up for our supporting listeners group. I'm going to be going right now to go reach out to the people who already signed up and try to get them actually connected to the supporting listeners group. So thank you guys. Thank you everybody. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks, and we'll see you on Thursday.
See you later.